The snow fell in thick sheets across downtown Denver, blanketing Parker Street in white silence. Most people had rushed home hours ago, eager to escape the bitter December cold and begin their Christmas Eve celebrations. But on a bench near the corner of 16th Street, a small figure lay curled beneath a torn blue blanket, barely visible against the mounting drifts. Grace Turner's lips had turned purple. Her 7-year-old body shook with tremors she could no longer control. She clutched a photograph to her chest, the edges once soft from constant touching. In the picture, a smiling woman with kind eyes held a younger version of Grace on her lap. Both wore matching red dresses. Both looked happy. That was before everything fell apart. Grace's fingers had gone numb an hour ago. She could not feel her toes anymore. The shelter where she had been staying closed 3 days earlier when the building failed inspection. The social worker said she would have to go to a group home in Aurora, but Grace refused. She had to stay here. Her mother would come back to this bench. This was where they used to eat lunch together on Saturdays when Mama was still well. This was where Mama had promised they would always find each other if they got separated. 6 months had passed since that promise. 6 months since Mama disappeared. Grace tried to remember what warmth felt like. She thought about hot chocolate, about the apartment they used to have, about the way Mama would wrap her in blankets and read stories until she fell asleep. But the memories felt distant now, like they belonged to someone else's life. Her eyelids grew heavy. The cold did not hurt as much anymore. That scared her more than the pain had. Jonathan Reed walked quickly down Parker Street, his wool coat pulled tight against the wind. He had stayed late at the office, finishing year-end reports that could have waited until January. But going home to his empty penthouse held little appeal, even on Christmas Eve. He had built a successful real estate development company over 20 years, accumulated more wealth than he could spend, and somehow ended up more alone than he had been at the start. His breath formed white clouds in the frigid air. He should have driven, but the walk from his office usually helped him think. Tonight his mind wandered to the charity gala he had skipped earlier. Another rubber chicken dinner, another check written to ease his conscience, another evening of small talk with people who only knew the business version of him. He almost missed the bench entirely. The blue blanket registered first, just a heap of fabric on the park bench. Jonathan had walked past countless homeless people in Denver. He donated to shelters and affordable housing projects. He told himself that was enough. But something made him stop this time. Something about the size of the blanket. The way it moved slightly, rhythmically, as if someone beneath it was breathing. Jonathan approached the bench slowly. When he pulled back the corner of the blanket, his heart stopped. A child. A little girl with blonde hair matted against her forehead. Her face was pale, her lips discolored. Ice crystals had formed on her eyelashes. "Hey," Jonathan said, his voice urgent. "Hey, can you hear me?" Grace's eyes fluttered open. She looked at him with confusion, as if she could not quite remember where she was or why a stranger was speaking to her. "I'm waiting for my mama," she whispered. Her voice was so soft Jonathan had to lean close to hear her. "She's coming back," she promised. "Okay, but we need to get you warm," Jonathan said. He pulled out his phone to call 911, but his hands shook so badly he nearly dropped it. How long had she been out here? How had no one else seen her? "No," Grace said, trying to sit up. The effort seemed to exhaust her. "No hospital. I have to stay here. Mama won't know where to find me." "Listen to me," Jonathan said, crouching down so he was at her eye level. "Your mama would want you to be safe and warm. We'll leave a note right here on the bench telling her where you are. I promise we'll make sure she can find you." Grace studied his face. Even through her confusion and hypothermia, something in his expression must have convinced her. She nodded slightly. Jonathan stripped off his coat and wrapped it around her small frame. She weighed almost nothing. He could feel her bones through her thin clothes. As he lifted her from the bench, the photograph slipped from her fingers and fell into the snow. Jonathan grabbed it quickly, tucking it into his coat pocket before picking Grace up again. She rested her head against his shoulder, and he could feel how cold her skin was even through his suit jacket. "What's your name?" he asked as he hurried toward his car, which was parked 2 blocks away. "Grace," she murmured. "Grace and Turner." "I'm Jonathan. I'm going to help you, Grace. Everything is going to be okay." He did not know if he was lying. She felt so fragile in his arms, like she might break if he held her wrong. The walk to his car seemed to take forever. Other pedestrians passed them without a second glance. A man carrying a child on Christmas Eve looked normal, even sweet. No one saw the emergency unfolding. Jonathan placed Grace in the back seat, cranking the heat to maximum. He drove faster than he should have, running a red light at the intersection of Colfax and Broadway. His mind raced. Who was this child? Where was her mother? How had she ended up alone on a park bench in the middle of winter? Grace drifted in and out of consciousness during the short drive to Denver General. Jonathan kept talking to her, asking her questions to keep her awake. "Tell me about your mama," he said. "What does she look like?" "She's pretty," Grace said. "She has blonde hair like me. She used to be a nurse before she got sick." "What kind of sick?" "Sad sick. Doctor sick. I don't know the word." Grace's eyes closed again. "Grace, stay with me. What's your favorite color?" "Red. Like the dress in the picture. Mama made those dresses. She can sew anything." Jonathan pulled up to the emergency entrance, hazard lights flashing. He carried Grace through the automatic doors, and the warm air hit them like a wall. "I need help," he called out. "I found her outside. She has hypothermia." A nurse rushed over with a wheelchair, but Jonathan did not want to put Grace down. The nurse seemed to understand. She led them quickly to a treatment room where 2 doctors were waiting. "How long was she exposed?" one doctor asked. "I don't know. I found her maybe 10 minutes ago on a bench downtown." The medical team moved fast, asking questions Jonathan could not answer. They stripped away Grace's wet clothes, wrapped her in heated blankets, started in 4. Through it all, Grace kept asking for her mama. "We'll find her," Jonathan said, though he had no idea how to keep that promise. "We'll find her, Grace." A social worker appeared in the doorway. She was a tired-looking woman in her 50s named Barbara Chen who had seen too many cases like this. "Are you family?" she asked Jonathan. "No. I found her outside. She was alone." Barbara nodded, making notes on a clipboard. "Did she say anything about parents? About where she's been staying?" Jonathan relayed what little Grace had told him. Barbara's expression grew more concerned with each detail. "We've been looking for this child," Barbara said quietly. "Grace Turner. She disappeared from a shelter 3 days ago when it closed. The caseworker who was supposed to transport her to a group home got sick. Another worker was assigned, but by the time they arrived, Grace was gone. We've had people searching." "She was on a bench," Jonathan said, anger creeping into his voice. "Right out in the open. On Parker Street." "I know," Barbara said. She sounded defeated. The system failed her. It fails a lot of them. One of the doctors called Barbara over. They spoke in low tones that Jonathan could not hear. When Barbara returned, she looked even more troubled. "She's going to be okay physically," Barbara said. "But we need to figure out placement. The group home in Aurora is full now. We're looking at facilities in Colorado Springs or Fort Collins." "No," Jonathan said. The word came out harder than he intended. "She stays in Denver. Her mother is here." "Mr. Reed, we don't know where her mother is. Rebecca Turner has been missing for 6 months. She had a mental health crisis and disappeared from a treatment facility. We've tried to locate her." "Then try harder," Jonathan said. "Grace believes her mother is coming back. Maybe she's right." Barbara looked at him with something like pity. "These cases rarely end the way we hope. The best thing for Grace is stability, structure, professional care." "The best thing for Grace is being found by people who actually give a damn," Jonathan said. "How does a 7-year-old fall through the cracks like this?" "You'd be surprised how easily it happens," Barbara said. She was not being defensive, just stating a sad fact. "Especially when parents are unstable. Especially when there's no extended family in the picture. The sister is somewhere in Boulder, but we haven't been able to locate her either." Jonathan looked through the window of the treatment room. Grace was asleep now, surrounded by monitors and medical equipment. She looked even smaller in the hospital bed. One hand still clutched at the blankets as if holding onto something precious. "I want to help," Jonathan said. That's kind of you, but this is a matter for Child Protective Services now. We have procedures. Your procedures almost killed her tonight. The accusation hung in the air between them. Barbara did not argue. She could not. Let me take her home tonight, Jonathan said. Tomorrow is Christmas. Let her have one normal day before you ship her off to some facility where she's just another case number. Mr. Reed, I can't just release her to a stranger. Then make it official. Emergency placement. Temporary foster care. Whatever paperwork you need, I'll sign it. I'll pay for background checks, home studies, whatever it takes. But don't send her somewhere else tonight. Barbara studied him carefully. She had seen plenty of wealthy people play hero before. It usually lasted about as long as the positive feelings did, maybe a week or two before reality set in. But she also saw something in Jonathan Reed's eyes that looked like genuine desperation. And Grace needed somewhere to go. The group homes were full. The foster families on their list were already over capacity. Christmas Eve was the worst possible time to find emergency placement. I'll need to make some calls, Barbara said. If your background check comes back clean, if you agree to daily social worker visits, if Grace consents when she wakes up, then maybe we can arrange something temporary. Very temporary. Just until we sort this out. Thank you, Jonathan said. Don't thank me yet. Taking care of a traumatized child is not like writing a check to charity. It's messy and hard and it doesn't always end well. I know, Jonathan said, though he absolutely did not know. He had never been around children. His marriage had ended before kids became part of the equation. His life was board meetings and property deals and quiet evenings alone. But looking at Grace through that window, he felt something shift inside his chest. She had been invisible to everyone else on that street tonight. All the people who walked past her, all the systems that should have caught her, all the safety nets that were supposed to exist. They had all failed. He would not fail her too. The doctor emerged from Grace's room at 2 in the morning with cautiously good news. Her core temperature had risen. The shivering had stopped. Her vitals were stabilizing. Children were resilient, he explained. Grace would recover physically, though she would need to stay for observation for at least another day. Jonathan had not left the hospital. He sat in the uncomfortable plastic chair near the nurse's station, running on coffee and adrenaline. Barbara had been true to her word. She made calls to supervisors who made calls to judges. Emergency paperwork was filed. Jonathan's background check came back clean within an hour. Having resources and connections helped expedite things that usually took weeks. Still, nobody felt entirely comfortable with the arrangement. This is highly irregular, Barbara said when she returned with the signed documents at 3 in the morning. The only reason this is happening is because we literally have nowhere else to put her right now. And because the judge knows you, apparently. Judge Morrison and I serve on the same hospital board, Jonathan admitted. Of course you do. Barbara handed him a stack of papers. These outline the conditions. A social worker will visit your home tomorrow. Well, today, I suppose. Grace cannot leave the city without permission. You'll need to keep detailed records of her care. And if we locate suitable placement or her mother, this arrangement ends immediately. Understood. Mr. Reed, I need you to be realistic about this. Grace has trauma. She's been living in survival mode. She may not act like a normal 7-year-old. She may have behaviors that are challenging. I can handle it. Can you? Barbara looked at him directly. You seem like a good man. But you're also used to solving problems with money and influence. This isn't that kind of problem. Grace needs consistency, patience, and someone who won't give up when things get hard. I won't give up. Barbara sighed. She wanted to believe him. Okay. The doctor says she can be discharged tomorrow afternoon if everything continues to improve. Here's my card. Call me with any problems or questions. I mean it. Anytime, day or night. Jonathan took the card and put it in his wallet. After Barbara left, he sat with Grace while she slept. The photograph he had recovered from the snow was in his pocket. He took it out and studied the image under the harsh fluorescent lights. Rebecca Turner looked young in the photo, maybe late 20s. She had Grace's same delicate features, the same light blonde hair. Both of them wore red dresses with white trim. It looked like Christmas or maybe a birthday. They sat on a couch in what seemed like a modest living room. Rebecca held Grace protectively, both of them smiling at the camera with genuine joy. "What happened to you?" Jonathan wondered. "Where did you go?" Grace stirred in her sleep. Jonathan put the photo away and moved closer to the bed. Her blonde hair had been washed and combed by one of the nurses. Without the dote and tangles, she looked even younger, more vulnerable. "Mama," Grace murmured without waking. Jonathan felt something crack in his chest. He had built his life on logic, strategy, calculated risks. But sitting in this hospital room with a child who had no one else, he felt the weight of a different kind of responsibility. One that could not be delegated or managed from a distance. The sky outside the window began to lighten. Christmas Day was arriving. Somewhere in the city, families were waking up to open presents, to make breakfast, to enjoy the holiday. Grace would wake up in a hospital without her mother, with a stranger promising to help her. Jonathan made a decision then. He would not just provide temporary shelter. He would find Rebecca Turner. He would reunite this family. He had resources, connections, and time. If the system had given up, he would not. His phone buzzed with a text message. It was from his housekeeper, Mrs. Patricia Sullivan, a widow in her 60s who had worked for him for 15 years. "Merry Christmas, Mr. Reed. I saw the news about the girl you found. Do you need help?" Jonathan stared at the message. He had not thought about how the story might have reached the media. Someone at the hospital must have talked to reporters. He quickly searched online and found several local news articles about a CEO who rescued a homeless child on Christmas Eve. Great. The last thing he wanted was publicity. But Mrs. Sullivan's offer gave him an idea. He called her, despite the early hour. "Patricia, I'm sorry to bother you on Christmas." "Nonsense. Tell me what you need." Jonathan explained the situation as simply as he could. Grace would be coming home with him that afternoon. She needed clothes, basic supplies, and someone who knew about children. "I'll be there by noon," Patricia said without hesitation. "My daughter can handle Christmas dinner without me. This child needs help now. I'll pay you triple." "Mr. Reed, I'm not doing this for money. I'll see you at noon." After she hung up, Jonathan felt some of the tension in his shoulders ease. Patricia had raised 3 children. She would know what to do. Grace woke around 8. She looked around the hospital room with confusion until her eyes landed on Jonathan. Recognition flickered across her face. "You're the man from the bench," she said. "That's right. I'm Jonathan. Do you remember last night?" Grace nodded slowly. "You brought me here. You said you'd help find Mama." "I did say that. And I meant it. Mama's coming back," she promised. Jonathan pulled a chair close to the bed. "Grace, can you tell me more about your Mama? When did you see her last?" Grace's face scrunched up as she tried to remember. "It was summer. We were staying at Aunt Helen's apartment in Boulder, but Mama got really sad. She cried all the time. One day some people came and took her to the hospital. Aunt Helen said Mama needed help getting better. Then Aunt Helen had to move for a job, and she brought me to Denver to stay at the shelter until Mama came back." "And you haven't heard from your Mama since then?" "No, but she promised. At our bench on Parker Street. That's where we would meet if we got separated. So I had to go there. I had to wait." The simple logic of a 7-year-old. Keep the promise. Wait at the bench. Mama will come. "Grace, the doctors say you're doing much better. This afternoon, you can leave the hospital. But we need to figure out where you'll stay while we look for your Mama." Fear crossed Grace's face. "The group home. The lady said I have to go to the group home." "No, I have a different idea. What if you stayed with me for a while? I have a big apartment with an extra bedroom. My friend Patricia will be there to help take care of you. You'd be safe and warm, and we could look for your Mama together." Grace studied him with an intensity that seemed beyond her years. "Why would you help me?" It was a fair question. Jonathan had been asking himself the same thing all night. "Because I found you," he said finally. "And now that I know you need help, I can't just walk away." Lots of people walked away. The statement hit Jonathan hard. She was right. Dozens of people must have passed that bench. None of them stopped. "I know," he said quietly. "But I'm not walking away now. I promise." Grace reached under her pillow and pulled out the photograph. "One of the nurses must have placed it there. If I stay with you, can I keep looking for Mama? Can I go back to the bench?" "We'll find better ways to look for her," Jonathan said. "Ways that keep you safe. But yes, we'll keep looking. I give you my word." Grace clutched the photo to her chest. "Okay, I'll stay with you." A nurse came in with breakfast, which Grace ate slowly. Toast and scrambled eggs and orange juice. Simple food, but she savored every bite. Jonathan watched her and realized she probably had not had a real meal in days. The morning passed with doctor visits and paperwork. Barbara stopped by to check on them and to go over the rules one more time. Grace would start at a local school after winter break. Jonathan would need to provide proof of a safe living environment. Social workers would make regular visits. At 3 in the afternoon, Grace was officially discharged. A nurse brought clothes that had been donated to the hospital, a pair of jeans and a pink sweater that was slightly too big. Grace's own clothes had been too dirty and damaged to keep. Jonathan led her out to his car, and she climbed into the back seat without being asked. During the drive to his downtown penthouse, Grace pressed her face against the window, watching the city pass by. "It's pretty," she said. "All the lights." Denver was decorated for Christmas. Strings of white lights hung from buildings and trees. Stall windows displayed winter scenes. People walked the sidewalks carrying shopping bags and wrapped presents. "Have you lived in Denver your whole life?" Jonathan asked. "I think so. Mama said I was born here. We used to have an apartment near the park. But then Grandma and Grandpa died, and Mama got sad. We lost the apartment. That's when we went to Aunt Helen's." "What about your father?" "I don't have one. Mama said he left before I was born. She said it's just us, and that's okay because we have each other." They pulled into the underground parking garage of Jonathan's building. Grace's eyes went wide when they stepped into the elevator, and Jonathan pressed the button for the top floor. "You live in the sky," she said. "Sort of. It's called a penthouse." The elevator opened directly into his apartment. Patricia was waiting for them, a warm smile on her round face. She wore a comfortable cardigan, and her gray hair was pulled back in a bun. "You must be Grace," Patricia said, crouching down to the girl's level. "I'm Patricia, but you can call me Mrs. Sullivan if you like." Grace looked at Jonathan, seeking permission. He nodded. "Hello," Grace said quietly. "I've made some hot chocolate," Patricia said. "And I set up a bedroom for you. Would you like to see it?" Grace's hand found Jonathan's and gripped it tightly. She was scared, he realized. For all her bravery, she was still just a small child in a strange place with people she did not know. "It's okay," Jonathan said. "Mrs. Sullivan is a friend. She wants to help too." They walked through the apartment together. Jonathan saw his home through Grace's eyes and suddenly felt self-conscious about the expensive furniture, the modern art on the walls, the floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the city. It looked cold, empty, not at all like a place where a child should live. But the bedroom Patricia had prepared was different. She had brought bedding from her own home, a cheerful quilt with sunflowers on it. There were stuffed animals on the bed, books on the nightstand, and a small lamp that cast a warm glow. "This is for me?" Grace asked. "All yours," Patricia said, "for as long as you need it." Grace walked slowly into the room, touching things gently as if afraid they might disappear. She picked up a stuffed bear and held it close. "Thank you," she whispered. Jonathan felt his throat tighten. Such a simple thing, a bedroom and some toys. And yet it meant everything to this child who had been sleeping on a bench in the snow just hours ago. They spent the rest of Christmas Day quietly. Patricia made dinner while Grace explored the apartment. She was careful with everything, asking permission before touching anything, apologizing when she made noise. "You don't have to be so careful," Jonathan told her. "This is your home now. You can relax." But trust was not built in a day. Grace remained cautious, watchful. During dinner, she ate slowly, as if expecting the food to be taken away. When Patricia offered seconds, Grace looked stunned. "I can have more." "Of course, sweetheart. You can have as much as you want." After dinner, They sat in the living room. Patricia had found a Christmas movie on television, something cheerful and bright. Grace curled up on the couch with her stuffed bear, her eyes heavy. "Can I ask you something?" Grace said to Jonathan. "Anything." "When we find Mama, will she be able to stay here too? I don't want to leave her alone again." Jonathan exchanged a glance with Patricia. The question was more complicated than Grace understood. But looking at her hopeful face, he could only give one answer. "When we find your Mama, we'll figure it out together. I promise you won't be alone." "Okay." Grace's eyes drifted closed. "Thank you for not walking away." Within minutes, she was asleep. Jonathan carefully picked her up and carried her to the bedroom Patricia had prepared. He tucked her under the sunflower quilt, and she did not wake. Back in the living room, Patricia poured them both coffee. "That's a big promise you made," she said. "I know. Do you have a plan?" "I'm going to hire a private investigator. The best one I can find. Someone who specializes in finding missing people. And if they find her, what if Rebecca Turner is in no condition to care for a child? Then we'll cross that bridge when we come to it. But Grace needs to know people are trying. She needs hope." Patricia smiled sadly. "You have a good heart, Mr. Reed. I hope it doesn't get broken." "It's not about me," Jonathan said. "It's about keeping a promise to a little girl who's already been let down too many times." He looked toward the hallway where Grace slept. Tomorrow he would make calls. He would start the search. He would use every resource at his disposal to find Rebecca Turner. Because Grace was right. Mama had promised. And promises mattered. Grace woke on her first morning in Jonathan's penthouse to sunlight streaming through windows she did not recognize. For a panicked moment, she forgot where she was. Then she saw the sunflower quilt, the stuffed bear beside her, and remembered. The man from the bench. The hospital. The promise. She climbed out of bed and padded quietly down the hallway. Voices came from the kitchen, Mrs. Sullivan and Jonathan talking in low tones. Grace stopped just outside the doorway, listening. "The investigator can start immediately," Jonathan was saying. "He specializes in finding people who don't want to be found. If Rebecca Turner is anywhere in Colorado, he'll locate her. And if she's not in Colorado, then we expand the search. Money isn't the issue here. Mr. Reed, I have to ask, what's your plan long term? You can't keep Grace indefinitely without going through proper channels. And if her mother is truly unable to care for her, I'll adopt her if it comes to that." Silence. Grace held her breath. "You don't mean that," Mrs. Sullivan finally said. "You've known her less than 24 hours. "I mean it. Look, Patricia, I know this sounds crazy, but I can't explain it. When I found her on that bench, something changed. I can't send her into the system. I won't. Adopting a traumatized child isn't like rescuing a puppy, Mr. Reed. This is a lifetime commitment." "I understand that." "Do you? You work 70 hours a week. You travel constantly. Your life isn't set up for a child. Then I'll change my life." Grace did not wait to hear more. She walked into the kitchen, and both adults stopped talking immediately. Mrs. Sullivan smiled brightly, but Grace could see the concern in her eyes. "Good morning, sweetheart," Mrs. Sullivan said. "Are you hungry? I can make pancakes." Pancakes. Grace had not had pancakes in so long she could barely remember what they tasted like. "With chocolate chips if you want." Grace nodded, still cautious. She sat at the kitchen table while Mrs. Sullivan cooked. Jonathan poured her a glass of orange juice and sat across from her. "Did you sleep okay?" he asked. "Yes. The bed is soft." "Good. Grace, I want to talk to you about something. I'm going to hire someone to help find your mama. A private investigator. That's a person whose job is to look for people." Grace's eyes widened. "Really? Really? His name is Thomas Wright, and he's very good at his job. But I need you to tell me everything you can remember about your mama. Even little details might help." Over breakfast, Grace talked. She told them about the apartment near the park, about Mama's job at the hospital before she got sick, about Grandma and Grandpa's house in Thornton where they used to visit. She mentioned Aunt Helen, who moved somewhere for work but Grace could not remember where. Jonathan took notes on his phone, creating a list of names, places, and dates. Every detail mattered. Your mama was a nurse? Jonathan asked. Yes. At Denver General. She worked in the place where babies are born. Labor and delivery, Mrs. Sullivan said. She loved it. But then Grandma got cancer and Mama had to take care of her. Grandpa died first, heart attack. Then Grandma died too. That's when Mama got really sad. That must have been hard for both of you, Jonathan said gently. Grace nodded. Mama tried to keep working, but she cried all the time. Then we lost our apartment because she couldn't pay for it anymore. We stayed with Aunt Helen for a while, but then Mama had to go to the hospital. The mental health facility, Mrs. Sullivan said quietly to Jonathan. What happened after your Mama went to the hospital? Jonathan asked. Aunt Helen kept me at her apartment. She was nice, but she was busy a lot. Then she said she got a new job and had to move. She brought me to the shelter here in Denver. She said Mama would come get me when she was better. But Mama never came. Did your aunt visit you at the shelter? Once. She cried and said she was sorry. She gave me money, but the shelter people had to keep it for me. She said she'd come back, but she didn't. Jonathan made more notes. Helen Morrison, Boulder, new job, last seen approximately 5 months ago. Between Helen and Rebecca, he had 2 people to locate. After breakfast, Mrs. Sullivan suggested they go shopping for clothes. Grace had nothing except what she wore. Jonathan handed Patricia his credit card without hesitation and told her to get whatever Grace needed. At the department store, Grace stood frozen in the girls' clothing section. Row after row of bright shirts, jeans, dresses, and jackets stretched before her. She had not been shopping in over a year. Pick whatever you like, Mrs. Sullivan said. Anything. Anything at all, sweetheart. Grace reached tentatively for a red sweater, then pulled her hand back. How much does it cost? Don't worry about that. Mr. Reed wants you to have new clothes. But I don't want to use all his money. Mrs. Sullivan knelt down beside her. Grace, Mr. Reed has plenty of money. He wants to help you. It makes him happy to do this. You're not being a burden. Grace had heard that word before. Burden. At the shelter, one of the workers had said she was becoming a burden on the system. The words had stung then and still stun now. I promise you're not a burden, Mrs. Sullivan said, as if reading her thoughts. Now, let's find you some warm clothes. Winter in Denver is cold, and you need a proper coat. They spent 2 hours shopping. Grace selected items carefully, always asking if something was okay before adding it to the cart. Mrs. Sullivan gently encouraged her to choose more, to get things she actually liked instead of just what was practical. By the end, they had 3 large bags full of clothes, shoes, a warm winter coat in deep blue, pajamas, socks, and even a new backpack for school. Grace carried one of the smaller bags herself, holding it close like it might vanish. On the drive back to the penthouse, Mrs. Sullivan asked, "What do you like to do, Grace? Do you have any hobbies?" Grace thought about it. I used to draw. Mama got me colored pencils for my birthday. We should get you some art supplies then. Really? Really? What else? I like reading. Mama read to me every night. But I'm not very good at it by myself yet. Well, we'll have to practice together. I love reading. Back at the apartment, they found Jonathan on the phone in his office. When he finished the call, he came out to find Grace organizing her new clothes in the bedroom closet. How was shopping? He asked. Good, Grace said. Thank you for the clothes. I'll be very careful with them. You don't have to be careful. Clothes are meant to be worn and played in. And if they get dirty, we'll wash them. Grace nodded, but Jonathan could see she did not quite believe him. She had been in survival mode for too long. Normal childhood freedoms felt dangerous to her. I have some news, Jonathan said. The investigator I told you about, Mr. Wright, is coming over this afternoon to talk with us. He wants to ask you some questions about your memo. Is that okay? Fear flickered across Grace's face. What kind of questions? Just about what she looks like, places she liked to go, people she knew. Things that might help him find her. Okay, I want to help. Thomas Wright arrived at 3 o'clock. He was a man in his 50s with gray hair and kind eyes, wearing a simple blue shirt and khaki pants. He shook Grace's hand seriously, treating her like an adult. "Miss Turner, thank you for meeting with me," he said. "I'm going to do everything I can to find your mother." They sat in the living room. Mrs. Sullivan brought hot chocolate and cookies. Thomas pulled out a notebook, but he kept his body language relaxed and friendly. "Can you tell me what your mom looks like?" he asked. Grace described Rebecca in detail. "Blonde hair, blue eyes, about this tall, has a small scar on her left hand from a cooking accident. She liked to wear jeans and comfortable shoes because she was on her feet all day at the hospital. Did she have any favorite places? Coffee shops, parks, stores. She loved the botanical gardens. We went there every spring. And there was a bookstore on Colfax Avenue she liked. Old books." Thomas wrote everything down. He asked about Rebecca's friends, co-workers, anyone she might have contacted. Grace remembered a few names, other nurses from the hospital, a neighbor from their old apartment building. "What about your Aunt Helen? Do you remember anything about her job or where she was moving?" Grace scrunched up her face, trying to remember. She said something about mountains. "And teaching. I think she was going to be a teacher." "That's helpful," Thomas said. "Mountain towns, teaching position. What else can you remember about her?" "She looked like Mama but with darker hair. She was younger, I think. She was nice but she seemed sad too." Thomas asked more questions, building a picture of the family, the timeline, the last known locations. After an hour, he closed his notebook. "Grace, you've been very helpful. I'm going to start searching right away. It might take some time, but I won't give up. Promise." "I promise." After Thomas left, Jonathan ordered pizza for dinner. Grace ate 3 slices, more than she had eaten at any single meal in months. Her stomach was finally starting to trust that food would keep coming. That night, Mrs. Sullivan helped Grace take a bath and wash her hair properly. Grace stared at herself in the mirror afterward, barely recognizing the clean, cared-for child looking back at her. "You look beautiful," Mrs. Sullivan said. "I look different." "You look healthy. That's what happens when people take care of you." In her new pajamas, Grace climbed into bed. Jonathan came to say goodnight and found her staring at the photograph of her and Rebecca. "Do you think Mr. Wright will really find her?" Grace asked. "I think he's going to try very hard. And we're going to help him in every way we can." "What if Mama doesn't want to be found? What if she left because I was too much trouble?" Jonathan sat on the edge of the bed. "Grace, listen to me. Parents don't leave because their children are trouble. If your Mama left, it was because she was sick and needed help. It had nothing to do with you not being good enough." "How do you know?" "Because I can see how much she loved you in that picture. That kind of love doesn't just go away." Grace studied the photograph. "She used to tell me I was her whole world. She said we were a team. And you still are. We're just going to find her and bring your team back together." Grace set the photo on the nightstand where she could see it. "Jonathan, thank you for keeping your promise. For not walking away." "You don't have to thank me, Grace. I'm glad I found you." After Grace fell asleep, Jonathan returned to his office and called Thomas Wright. "What are our chances?" Jonathan asked bluntly. "Better than I expected," Thomas said. "Grace gave me solid leads. Rebecca Turner exists in the system. She has a social security number, a nursing license, medical records. She's not a ghost. Someone somewhere has seen her in the last 6 months." "Where do you start?" "With the last confirmed sighting, the treatment facility in Colorado Springs. Then I'll track her sister Helen. After that, I'll check homeless shelters, hospitals, anywhere someone in crisis might end up. If she's alive and in Colorado, I'll find her. And if she's not in Colorado, let's not borrow trouble. One step at a time." Jonathan hung up and stared out the window at the Denver skyline. Snow was falling again, soft and white. He thought about all the other benches in the city, all the other children who might be out there right now, with no one looking for them. His phone buzzed with an email from his assistant. The board meeting scheduled for next week had been moved up. 2 property deals needed his attention. A contractor was demanding a decision on the downtown development project. Business as usual. Except nothing felt usual anymore. Jonathan sent a reply moving the board meeting back again and delegating the property decisions. For the first time in 20 years, work was not his priority. Finding Grace's mother was. Thomas Wright called 3 days later with his first update. He had visited the mental health facility in Colorado Springs where Rebecca Turner had been a patient 6 months earlier. She was there for 8 weeks, Thomas told Jonathan over the phone. Diagnosed with severe depression and PTSD related to her parents' deaths. According to the staff, she was making progress. She talked about Grace constantly, said her daughter was her reason for getting better. So what happened? She completed the program. They released her with referrals for outpatient therapy and medication. She was supposed to check in with a social worker in Denver weekly. She made the first 2 appointments, then disappeared. Jonathan felt frustration building. How does someone just disappear from that much oversight? Easier than you'd think. The social worker had 40 other cases. Rebecca stopped answering her phone, stopped showing up to appointments. By the time anyone realized she had fallen through the cracks, the trail was cold. What about her sister, Helen Morrison? That's where it gets interesting. I found her. She's teaching at a charter school in Breckenridge. I spoke with her yesterday. And she's devastated. She didn't know Grace ended up in a shelter. She thought the social workers would place her in a good foster home. Helen had to take the teaching job to keep her own life together. She's buried in student loans, working 2 jobs. She couldn't afford to keep Grace, but she's been racked with guilt about it. Does she know where Rebecca is? No. But she confirmed Rebecca called her about 3 months ago from a number Helen didn't recognize. Rebecca said she was okay, that she was working and saving money to get Grace back. She promised to call again, but never did. The number came back to a prepaid cell phone that's no longer in service. Jonathan processed this information. Rebecca was alive 3 months ago. She was working. She was trying to rebuild her life. Where do we look next? Jonathan asked. I'm checking employment records, homeless shelters, cheap hotels. If she was working, she was probably doing something under the table or using a different name. But people leave traces. I'll find them. After hanging up, Jonathan found Grace in the living room with Mrs. Sullivan. They were reading together, Grace following along as Patricia read aloud from a children's book about a girl who lived in the mountains. Grace, can I talk to you for a minute? Jonathan asked. Grace marked the page and set the book aside. She looked nervous. Serious conversations still scared her. Mr. Wright found out some things about your mama, Jonathan said. Good things. She completed her treatment at the hospital in Colorado Springs. The doctors said she was doing better. Really? Hope bloomed on Grace's face. Really? And she called your Aunt Helen about 3 months ago. She told her aunt that she was okay and working. So she's trying to come back to me. It looks that way. We just have to figure out where she is now. Grace threw her arms around Jonathan's waist. The hug surprised him. She had been cautious with physical affection, still not quite trusting that this new life was real. Thank you, Grace said against his shirt. Thank you for looking for her. Jonathan hugged her back, this small fierce girl who had survived so much. We're going to find her, Grace. I promise. 2 days later, Thomas called again. I think I found something. A woman matching Rebecca's description was working at a grocery store in Aurora about 6 weeks ago. She used the name Rebecca Miller, but the physical description matches. Blonde hair, blue eyes, small scar on her left hand. Can we talk to her employer? Already did. She worked night shift stocking shelves. Always on time, very quiet, kept to herself. She left the job suddenly about a month ago. Didn't give notice, didn't collect her last paycheck. Why would she leave like that? I'm trying to find out. But Jonathan, I think we're close. If she was in Aurora a month ago, she's probably still in the metro area. That evening, Jonathan made a decision. Grace, how would you feel about helping Mr. Wright with his investigation? Grace looked up from her homework. Mrs. Sullivan had started tutoring her to prepare for school in January. How can I help? Mr. Wright thinks your mama might have been working in Aurora. Tomorrow, We could drive there and ask around. Maybe someone will recognize her description. Maybe you'll remember something when you see the area. Can we really? If you want to. But Grace, I need you to understand that we might not find her right away. This could take time. I don't care. I want to help. The next morning, they drove to Aurora with Thomas Wright. He had identified several locations where Rebecca might have gone: homeless shelters, food banks, churches that offered services. Their first stop was a grocery store where Rebecca had worked. The manager, a tired-looking man named Steve, agreed to speak with them in his office. Rebecca Miller worked here for about 5 weeks, Steve said. Good worker, never caused problems. Then one night she just didn't show up. Never heard from her again. Did she mention anything about her life? Jonathan asked. Where she was staying, if she had family. Steve shook his head. She was private. Didn't socialize with the other employees. I got the impression she was going through a hard time, but she never said anything specific. Grace had been quiet, but now she spoke up. Did she seem sad? Steve looked at her with surprise. Yeah, kid. She did seem sad. But also determined, if that makes sense. Like she was working towards something. She was working to get me back, Grace said with certainty. After leaving the store, they visited a nearby shelter. The director, a woman named Carol Martinez, listened to their description of Rebecca. I remember her, Carol said. She stayed here for about 2 weeks, maybe a month ago. She was quiet, respectful. She left before we could really help her get into a program. Why did she leave? Thomas asked. I don't know. Sometimes people leave because they are not ready for help. Sometimes they have their own plans. Rebecca seemed like she was trying to do things her own way. They spent the rest of the day canvassing the area. They talked to volunteers at food banks, staff at other shelters, managers at cheap motels. Several people thought they recognized Rebecca from Thomas's description, but no one had seen her recently. By late afternoon, Grace was tired and discouraged. They stopped at a small diner for an early dinner. Grace pushed her food around her plate, not eating. Hey, Jonathan said gently. I know today was hard, but we learned things. We know your mama was here. We know she was trying. But we didn't find her. Not yet. But we will. What if something bad happened to her? What if that's why she stopped calling Aunt Helen? Thomas leaned forward. Grace, in my experience, people who are trying as hard as your mama was trying don't just give up. She left that job suddenly, which means something changed. Maybe she found a better opportunity. Maybe she heard about a place where she could get help. We just have to figure out what that was. On the drive back to Denver, Grace fell asleep in the back seat. Thomas rode with them, discussing next steps with Jonathan. I'm going to focus on transitional housing programs, Thomas said. Places that help people get back on their feet. Rebecca was working, saving money. That suggests she was trying to prove stability. Those programs would be the logical next step. How many programs are there? In the metro area? Dozens. But I'll check them all. They dropped Thomas at his office and drove home. Jonathan carried Grace up to the apartment. She woke briefly as he tucked her into bed. Jonathan, she murmured sleepily. Yeah. Do you think Mama knows people are looking for her? Do you think she knows I'm okay? I hope so, Grace. I really hope so. The next week passed in a blur of routine. Grace started working with a tutor to catch up on schoolwork. Mrs. Sullivan taught her to bake cookies. Jonathan rearranged his work schedule to be home for dinner every night. Grace slowly began to relax into her new life. She laughed more. She played with toys without constantly looking over her shoulder. She started to believe that food would keep coming, that the warm bed would still be there tomorrow. But every evening, before bed, she took out the photograph of her and Rebecca. And she whispered to it like a prayer, I'm waiting for you, Mama. I'm safe. Please come find me. Thomas called on a Friday afternoon with news. I think I've got a solid lead. There's a women's shelter in Aurora that specializes in helping mothers get back on their feet. They have a strict privacy policy, so they wouldn't confirm anything over the phone. But they didn't deny it either. I need to go in person with more information. Can you get me Rebecca's social security number or any other identifying information? I can try. Let me make some calls. Jonathan used his connections to obtain the information legally through Grace's social worker, Barbara. It took some convincing, but Barbara eventually agreed that finding Rebecca was in Grace's best interest. Armed with documentation, Thomas visited the shelter the next morning. When he called Jonathan afterward, his voice was different. Excited. She was there, Thomas said. Rebecca Turner. She stayed at the shelter for 3 weeks. They helped her find a job and apply for subsidized housing. She was doing well, attending counseling, following the program. Where is she now? She moved into a transitional apartment 2 weeks ago. The shelter director has the address. Jonathan's heart raced. Does she know about Grace? Does she know we're looking for her? That's the tricky part. The shelter has strict confidentiality rules. They can't just give me the address without Rebecca's permission. But they agreed to contact her and tell her that someone is trying to reach her about Grace. They'll pass along my number if she agrees to talk. How long will that take? Could be a few hours, could be a few days. It depends on when they can reach her and whether she's willing to respond. Jonathan wanted to scream with frustration. They were so close. Rebecca was alive. She was getting help. She was 2 weeks into a program that could reunite her with Grace. And now they had to wait for phone calls and permissions. But he understood. These programs protected vulnerable women. They could not just hand out addresses to anyone who asked, even if that person claimed good intentions. Call me the second you hear anything, Jonathan said. That evening, Jonathan debated whether to tell Grace. She would be so excited to hear they had found Rebecca. But what if Rebecca did not respond? What if she was not ready to reconnect? He decided to wait. One more day. If they heard back from Rebecca, then he would tell Grace. If not, he would figure out another approach. But Grace was perceptive. At dinner, she studied his face. Something happened, she said. You look different. Jonathan glanced at Mrs. Sullivan, who gave a small nod. Tell her the truth. Mr. Wright found out where your mama was staying, Jonathan said carefully. But because of privacy rules, he can't just go there. The people helping her have to contact her first and let her know we're trying to reach her. Grace's fork clattered to her plate. You found her? You know where she is. We know where she was 2 weeks ago. We're waiting to hear if she wants to talk to us. Why wouldn't she want to talk? I'm her daughter. Sometimes, Grace, when people are getting help, they need to focus on getting better before they can handle big emotional things. Your mama might be scared. She might think she failed you. Tears spilled down Grace's cheeks. She didn't fail me. I just want her back. Mrs. Sullivan moved around the table and put her arms around Grace. I know, sweetheart. And I bet your mama wants you back just as much. Sometimes these things take time. That night, Grace could not sleep. Jonathan sat with her, reading stories, talking about anything except Rebecca. Finally, around midnight, Grace's eyes closed. Jonathan returned to his office and stared at his phone, willing it to ring. It finally did at 7 the next morning. Jonathan. Thomas's voice was tight with emotion. She called me. Rebecca called. She wants to meet. Rebecca Turner sat in the small coffee shop on Colfax Avenue, her hands wrapped around a cup of tea she had not touched. Through the window, she watched the morning crowds hurry past, everyone focused on their own lives, their own problems. None of them knew that she was about to face the most important moment of her life. Thomas Wright had explained everything on the phone. A man named Jonathan Reed had found Grace on a bench on Christmas Eve. Grace was safe, healthy, living in his penthouse. She was going to start school in January, and she was asking for her mother every single day. Rebecca had cried for an hour after that call. Relief, shame, gratitude, and terror all mixed together. Her daughter was alive. Her daughter was okay. Her daughter still wanted her. But Rebecca was terrified that she was not ready, that she would fail again, that seeing Grace would break something inside her that she had worked so hard to repair. The shelter counselor had talked her through it. You're not the same person who had the breakdown, the counselor said. You've done the work. You're stable. Your daughter needs to see that you're okay. So here Rebecca sat, waiting to meet the stranger who had saved her child. Jonathan arrived exactly on time. Rebecca recognized him immediately from Thomas's description. Tall, well-dressed, early 40s, with kind eyes that looked tired. He spotted her by the window and walked over. "Rebecca Turner," he asked quietly. "Yes. You're Jonathan Reed. Thank you for agreeing to meet." They sat across from each other, two people connected by a 7-year-old girl, studying each other carefully. "How is she?" Rebecca asked. Her voice cracked. "How is Grace?" "She's okay. She's safe. She asks about you constantly." Rebecca closed her eyes. "I never stopped trying to get back to her. You have to know that. Every day I was away, I was working toward getting her back." "I believe you. But Rebecca, I need to understand what happened. Grace needs to understand." Rebecca took a shaky breath and told her story. The grief after losing both parents within 6 months. The depression that made it impossible to work, to function, to be the mother Grace deserved. The eviction from their apartment. Moving in with her sister Helen, who was barely keeping herself afloat. The final breakdown that landed her in the treatment facility. "They helped me at the hospital," Rebecca said. "They gave me medication, therapy, tools to cope. When I got out, I was so determined. I was going to get Grace back immediately. But then the social worker explained how it works. I needed to prove stability first. Housing, employment, consistent treatment. I couldn't just show up and take her." "So you disappeared to build a life?" "I didn't disappear. I checked in at first. But then I missed an appointment because I had to work a double shift. The social worker said that showed instability. I panicked. I thought if I tried to work through the system, they'd never give her back. So I decided to do it on my own. Get a job, save money, find housing, then go to court and fight for custody." "That's why you were using a different name at the grocery store." Rebecca nodded. "I was scared they'd find me before I was ready. I know that sounds terrible. But I wasn't running from Grace. I was running toward being good enough for her again." Jonathan listened without judgment. He could see the truth in her eyes. This was not a woman who had abandoned her child. This was a woman who had been broken by grief and was desperately trying to put herself back together. "Why did you leave the grocery store job?" Jonathan asked. "I found out about the transitional housing program. The shelter director said they could help me get into subsidized housing faster if I joined their program. But I had to commit to counseling, attend parenting classes, follow their rules. I quit the grocery store job and moved into the shelter the next day. And now I have a small apartment. It's not much, 1 bedroom in a complex in Aurora. But it's mine. I have a job working day shifts at a medical supply company. I'm taking my medication. I'm seeing a therapist twice a week. I've been following the program for 2 weeks. 2 weeks is not very long." "I know." Rebecca's voice broke. "I know I should wait longer, prove myself more. But Jonathan, I've been away from my daughter for 6 months. 6 months. Do you know what that does to a mother?" Jonathan thought about the past 2 weeks with Grace. The way she lit up when she accomplished something small. The way she still asked permission before doing ordinary things. The way she whispered to her mother's photograph every night. "She needs you," Jonathan said. "But Rebecca, I have to be honest. Grace has been through trauma. She's adjusting to stability. If you come back into her life, you can't leave again. Even if things get hard. Even if you struggle. You have to commit." "I know. I swear I will never leave her again." "I want to believe you. But I need more than promises. I need to see that you have support systems in place. That you won't fall apart if things get difficult." Rebecca pulled a folder from her bag. Inside were documents. Proof of her apartment lease. Her employment contract. Letters from her therapist and the shelter director confirming she was following her treatment plan. A parenting class completion certificate. A list of support groups she attended. Jonathan reviewed each page. This was not someone making empty promises. Rebecca had been working systematically toward reunion with her daughter. "I have a proposal," Jonathan said. "I think Grace should see you. Soon. But I think we should do this carefully. Maybe start with supervised visits, let you both adjust. I can provide resources to help. Housing if you need it, job connections, whatever support you require. Rebecca stiffened. I don't need charity. It's not charity. It's ensuring Grace's stability. Look, you've done everything right. You're getting help, building a life. But transitional apartments and entry-level jobs are not easy. If you're constantly stressed about making rent or putting food on the table, that affects Grace. Let me help remove those obstacles. Why would you do that? You don't know us. Because I found your daughter on a bench in the snow, and I promised her I would find you. And because every child deserves a chance to be with their parent if that parent is trying. Rebecca studied him. You're really taking care of her? Not just temporarily, until you hand her off. I'm committed to Grace for as long as she needs me. If you and Grace reunite, I'll support that transition. If for some reason that doesn't work out, I've already filed paperwork to become her legal guardian. You'd adopt her. If necessary. But I'd rather help you two rebuild your family. Tears spilled down Rebecca's cheeks. I don't know how to thank you. You saved her life. Literally. You can thank me by staying healthy and being the mother Grace remembers. That's all I ask. They talked for another hour, making plans. Thomas Wright would facilitate the first meeting in a neutral location with a counselor present. If that went well, they would increase visits gradually. Jonathan would connect Rebecca with better employment opportunities through his business network. He would help her find a larger apartment where Grace could have her own room. I want to do this right, Rebecca said. Not just for Grace, but for me too. I want to prove I can be stable. Then let's do this together, Jonathan said. They scheduled the first visit for 2 days later at a family counseling center. As they stood to leave, Rebecca grabbed Jonathan's hand. You're an answer to prayer, she said. I didn't think people like you existed. People like me. People who help without expecting anything in return. Jonathan thought about that as he drove back to the penthouse. He had not expected anything in return when he stopped at that bench. He had just known he could not walk away. But he had gained something. Purpose. Connection. The knowledge that his resources could change someone's life in a way that board meetings and property deals never could. Grace was waiting when he got home, practically bouncing with nervous energy. Mrs. Sullivan had told her about the meeting. Did you see her? Grace asked. Did you see Mama? I did. Is she okay? Is she coming back? Jonathan sat down, so he was at Grace's level. Your Mama is doing much better. She's been getting help and working really hard. She wants to see you. We set up a visit for Wednesday. Grace's face transformed with joy. Then fear flickered across it. What if she doesn't like me anymore? Grace, that's impossible. Your Mama loves you more than anything. She's been working so hard just so she could be with you again. Did she ask about me? She asked about you first thing. She cried when I told her you were safe. Grace threw her arms around Jonathan. Thank you. Thank you for finding her. That night, Grace could barely sleep. She kept getting up to look at the calendar, counting the days until Wednesday. Mrs. Sullivan helped her pick out an outfit to wear, the red sweater Grace had chosen on their first shopping trip. I want to look nice, Grace said. So Mama knows I'm okay. Tuesday morning, the local news ran a story about Jonathan and Grace. Someone had leaked the details. CEO finds homeless child, launches search for missing mother, facilitates reunion. Within hours, Jonathan's phone was ringing constantly. News outlets wanted interviews. Local charities wanted to discuss partnerships. People from across Colorado called with their own stories of missing family members, begging for help. Jonathan's assistant fielded most of the calls, but one got through. It was from a woman named Dr. Patricia Chen, who ran a nonprofit called Second Chances Network. Mr. Reed, I know you're busy, but I had to reach out, she said. What you've done for Grace and Rebecca, it's exactly the model we've been trying to promote. Stable, supportive intervention instead of just shuffling people through systems. I was just trying to help one child, Jonathan said. And that one child's story is already inspiring others. We've had 5 families reach out today asking about resources. People want to help. They just don't know how. An idea formed in Jonathan's mind. What if we scaled it? What if we created a program specifically for reuniting families? That's exactly what Second Chances Network does. But we're small, underfunded. With your resources and visibility. Let's meet, Jonathan said. After Grace and Rebecca's visit. Let's talk about what's possible. Wednesday arrived. Jonathan, Grace, and Mrs. Sullivan drove to the family counseling center. Grace sat in the back seat, clutching the photograph of her and Rebecca, her leg bouncing with nervous energy. What if I don't remember what to say? Grace asked. You don't have to say anything special, Mrs. Sullivan said. Just be yourself. Your mama loves you exactly as you are. The counseling center was warm and welcoming. The counselor, a kind woman named Dr. Sarah Martinez, met them in the lobby and explained how the visit would work. She would be in the room to help if things got difficult. They could take breaks if needed. The goal was just to reconnect, not to resolve everything in one meeting. Then Dr. Martinez opened a door, and there was Rebecca. She stood in the middle of the room, wearing jeans and a blue sweater, her hair pulled back. She looked thinner than in the photograph, older, worn down by months of struggle. But her eyes were the same, blue and bright and filled with love. Grace, she whispered. Grace stood frozen for a heartbeat. Then she was running, flying across the room into her mother's arms. Rebecca caught her and held on, both of them crying, both of them saying I'm sorry, and I love you and I missed you so much. Jonathan felt his throat tighten. Mrs. Sullivan reached over and squeezed his hand. They stayed like that for several minutes, mother and daughter clinging to each other as if afraid to let go. Finally, Dr. Martinez gently suggested they sit down. Rebecca could not stop touching Grace, smoothing her hair, holding her hand, assuring herself that her daughter was real and whole. You look so healthy, Rebecca said. You look happy. Jonathan and Mrs. Sullivan took care of me, Grace said. They gave me food and clothes and a bed with a sunflower blanket. Rebecca turned to Jonathan with tears streaming down her face. Thank you. Thank you for saving her. I don't have words big enough. You don't need to thank me, Jonathan said. I'm just glad we found you. They spent an hour together. Grace told Rebecca about living in the penthouse, about shopping for clothes, about learning to bake cookies. Rebecca explained where she had been, why she had to leave, how she had been working to come back. I never forgot my promise, Rebecca said. The bench on Parker Street. That's where we were supposed to meet. I waited there, Grace said. I knew you'd come back. I'm so sorry you had to wait. I'm so sorry I wasn't there. It's okay, Mama. You're here now. When the visit ended, Grace did not want to let go. But Dr. Martinez explained they would see each other again soon. Multiple times a week. And soon after that, they could talk about Grace going home with her mother. On the drive back, Grace was quiet. Finally, she spoke. Can I ask you something? Of course, Jonathan said. When I go back to live with Mama, will I still be able to see you? And Mrs. Sullivan? Jonathan's chest tightened. He had been so focused on reuniting Grace and Rebecca that he had not thought about what it would mean to say goodbye to the little girl who had changed his life. Of course you can see us, he said, his voice rougher than he intended. We'll always be part of your life, if you want us to be. I want that, Grace said quietly. I don't want to lose anyone else. Mrs. Sullivan turned in her seat. Sweetheart, you're not losing anyone. You're gaining your mama back. And we'll still be here. We'll be like family. Really? Really, Jonathan said, and he meant it. Grace had become part of his life in a way he had not anticipated. The thought of her leaving his penthouse hurt, but the thought of her being reunited with her mother was worth any pain he might feel. That evening, Grace talked non-stop about the visit. She recounted every word Rebecca had said, every hug, every smile. She was glowing with happiness in a way Jonathan had never seen before. But later, when he tucked her into bed, Grace looked worried again. What if Mama gets sick again? She asked. What if she has to leave? Your Mama is getting help now. She's taking medicine and seeing a therapist. And this time, she won't be alone. We'll all be here to support her. Me, Mrs. Sullivan, the people at the shelter, everyone who wants to help. Promise. I promise, Grace. We're all in this together now. The next morning, Jonathan met with Dr. Patricia Chen from Second Chances Network. They sat in his office while she outlined her organization's mission, helping families torn apart by poverty, mental health issues, addiction, and homelessness to reunite and rebuild. The problem with our current system, Dr. Chen explained, is that it's designed to separate families first and ask questions later. A mother like Rebecca loses her housing, loses her job, has a mental health crisis, and suddenly she's deemed unfit. Her child goes into foster care, and then the system makes it nearly impossible for them to reunite because the mother can't meet stability requirements without resources, but she can't get resources without proving stability. It's a trap, Jonathan said. Exactly. What you did with Grace and Rebecca, that's the model we need. Intensive support, resources without judgment, focus on reunification instead of separation. What would it take to scale that? Dr. Chen pulled out a proposal. Housing assistance, job training programs, mental health services, legal support, childcare. If we could provide those things to families in crisis, we could keep them together or reunite them faster. How much? To launch a pilot program in Denver? About $2 million for the first year. That would serve maybe 50 families. Jonathan did not hesitate. I'll fund it. $5 million. Let's serve more families. Dr. Chen stared at him. Mr. Reed, that's incredibly generous, but you should think about this. Talk to your financial advisors. I've spent 20 years making money. It's time I spent some of it on something that matters. Let's create something that actually works. News of Jonathan's donation spread quickly. Within days, other donors stepped forward. A local foundation matched his contribution. Businesses offered job training partnerships. Mental health clinics volunteered services. The community was rallying around an idea that families deserved support, not separation. Grace's visits with Rebecca increased to 3 times a week. Each visit went well. Mother and daughter fell back into their old rhythms, reading together, talking, making plans for the future. Rebecca was proving herself stable, showing up to every appointment, following her treatment plan religiously. 2 weeks after their first visit, Dr. Martinez suggested they try an overnight stay. Rebecca could take Grace to her apartment for the weekend. It would be a test run for eventual permanent reunification. Grace was excited but nervous. She had not been alone with her mother in 6 months. What if things had changed too much? What if it was not the same? It'll be good, Mrs. Sullivan assured her while helping pack a small bag. Your mama has a place of her own now. You'll get to see where she lives, spend real time together. But what if she needs help? What if something goes wrong? Then she'll call us, Jonathan said. We're just a phone call away, and you'll be back here Sunday evening. Rebecca picked Grace up on Friday afternoon. She had borrowed a car from the shelter program. Her hands shook slightly as she buckled Grace into the back seat. Ready? Rebecca asked. Ready, Grace said, though her voice wavered. Jonathan watched them drive away and felt an unexpected pang of loss. The apartment would be so quiet without Grace. She'll be fine, Mrs. Sullivan said, reading his thoughts. They both will be. But Friday night, Jonathan's phone rang at 10 o'clock. It was Rebecca, and she sounded panicked. Jonathan, I'm sorry to call so late, but Grace is having nightmares. She woke up crying, and I don't know what to do. She's asking for you. Put her on the phone. Grace's small voice came through, thick with tears. Jonathan, I had a bad dream. I was back on the bench and it was cold and no one could find me. Hey, it's okay. You're safe. You're with your mama. That won't happen again. But what if it does? What if mama has to leave again? Jonathan looked at the clock. It was late, but this was important. Grace, I'm coming over. I want to talk to both of you. Okay? Give the phone back to your mama. Rebecca gave him the address, apologizing repeatedly. Jonathan drove across town to Aurora, to a modest apartment complex with a cracked parking lot and flickering security lights. He found their unit on the 2nd floor. Rebecca opened the door looking exhausted and guilty. Grace sat on a small couch, still crying, clutching a pillow. Jonathan sat beside Grace and pulled her close. Tell me about your dream. I was on the bench and the snow kept coming and I couldn't move. I called for Mama but she didn't come. I called for you but you didn't come either. And then I woke up and I was in a place I didn't know and I got scared. That sounds really scary, Jonathan said. But Grace, look around. You're in your Mama's apartment. She's right here. I'm here now too. You're not alone on that bench anymore. But what if? What if is a scary question, Jonathan interrupted gently. It makes us worry about things that might never happen. Instead, let's talk about what is. What is true right now? Grace sniffled. Mama is here. That's right. What else? You're here. Mrs. Sullivan is a phone call away. Exactly. And you know what else is true? Your Mama has an apartment. She has a job. She's taking her medicine and seeing her therapist. She's doing everything she needs to do to stay healthy. None of that is going to disappear overnight. Rebecca sat down on Grace's other side. Baby, I know I scared you when I left. But I promise you, I'm not that person anymore. I'm stronger now. And this time, if things get hard, I won't handle it alone. I'll ask for help. From Jonathan, from my therapist, from the people at the shelter. I won't disappear again. Really promise. Really promise. Grace leaned against her mother. I'm sorry I got scared. Everyone raised their glasses. Grace beamed. Can I say something? Grace asked. Of course, Jonathan said. Grace stood up, suddenly shy with all eyes on her. I just want to say thank you. To everyone. When I was on that bench, I thought nobody cared about me. But then Jonathan stopped. And then all of you helped. You didn't have to, but you did. And now Mama and I get to be together again. So thank you. There was not a dry eye in the room. Later that evening, after everyone had left except Rebecca and Grace, the three of them sat in the living room. Grace had fallen asleep between them on the couch, exhausted from excitement. This is surreal, Rebecca said quietly. A month ago, I was alone in a shelter, terrified I'd never see my daughter again. Now look at us. You did the hard work, Jonathan said. You got help. You followed through. You didn't give up. I almost did. So many times. But I kept thinking about Grace on that bench, waiting for me. I couldn't let her down. You didn't. Rebecca looked at him. What you've done for us, for all those other families through the program, it's extraordinary. You're changing the world, Jonathan. I'm just trying to make sure what happened to Grace doesn't happen to other children. It's more than that. You're showing people that compassion is possible. That we don't have to accept broken systems. That one person really can make a difference. Jonathan thought about the man he had been 6 weeks ago. Successful, wealthy, and utterly alone. Going through the motions of life without really living. Grace had changed all of that. She had given him purpose. We should get her home, Rebecca said, looking at her sleeping daughter. Big day tomorrow. Big day, Jonathan agreed. As he watched Rebecca gently wake Grace and gather their things, he felt a bittersweet mix of emotions. Joy that this family was together again. Pride in what they had all accomplished. And a deep sadness that his home would be empty tomorrow. But also gratitude. Gratitude that he had stopped at that bench. Gratitude that he had not walked away. Because sometimes, saving someone else's life means saving your own. The morning of Grace's move, Jonathan woke early. The penthouse felt different already, as if it knew change was coming. He walked past the bedroom that had become Grace's, seeing the bare walls where her drawings had hung, the empty desk where she had done homework. Mrs. Sullivan arrived at 8 to help with the final preparations. She found Jonathan standing in Grace's doorway, staring at the sunflower quilt folded neatly on the bare mattress. You're going to miss her, Mrs. Sullivan said softly. More than I expected. You know, Mr. Reed, when you first brought her home, I wasn't sure about any of this. I thought maybe you'd change your mind after a few days. But you surprised me. How so? You didn't just help her. You let her help you. You let yourself care. Mrs. Sullivan touched his arm gently. That takes courage. Rebecca and Grace arrived at 10. They came with empty boxes to pack Grace's belongings, though there was not much. The clothes they had bought together, some toys, books, art supplies. The physical evidence of 6 weeks that had changed everything. Grace packed slowly, carefully folding each item. When she got to the stuffed bear from her first night, she held it for a long moment. "Can I take this?" she asked Rebecca. "Of course, baby. It's yours." "Jonathan gave it to me. I want to remember." "You don't need a bear to remember," Jonathan said. "I'll see you Wednesday for dinner, remember? And I'll be at your school for the parent breakfast on Friday." "You're really coming to school stuff." "I told you. We're family. I'll be there for everything." By noon, everything was packed. Mrs. Sullivan had prepared sandwiches for lunch, insisting they eat before the drive to Aurora. They sat around the dining table one last time, making small talk that danced around the emotions none of them quite knew how to express. The doorbell rang just as they were finishing lunch. Jonathan was not expecting anyone. He opened the door to find a woman in her early 30s standing in the hallway. She had blonde hair darker than Rebecca's, wearing jeans and a worn winter coat. Her eyes were red, as if she had been crying. Everyone raised their glasses. Grace beamed. "Can I say something?" Grace asked. "Of course," Jonathan said. Grace stood up, suddenly shy with all eyes on her. "I just want to say thank you. To everyone. When I was on that bench, I thought nobody cared about me. But then Jonathan stopped. And then all of you helped. You didn't have to, but you did. And now Mama and I get to be together again. So thank you." There was not a dry eye in the room. Later that evening, after everyone had left except Rebecca and Grace, the three of them sat in the living room. Grace had fallen asleep between them on the couch, exhausted from excitement. "This is surreal," Rebecca said quietly. "A month ago, I was alone in a shelter, terrified I'd never see my daughter again. Now look at us." "You did the hard work," Jonathan said. "You got help. You followed through. You didn't give up." "I almost did. So many times. But I kept thinking about Grace on that bench, waiting for me. I couldn't let her down." "You didn't." Rebecca looked at him. "What you've done for us, for all those other families through the program, it's extraordinary. You're changing the world, Jonathan." "I'm just trying to make sure what happened to Grace doesn't happen to other children." "It's more than that. You're showing people that compassion is possible. That we don't have to accept broken systems. That one person really can make a difference." Jonathan thought about the man he had been 6 weeks ago. Successful, wealthy, and utterly alone. Going through the motions of life without really living. Grace had changed all of that. She had given him purpose. "We should get her home," Rebecca said, looking at her sleeping daughter. "Big day tomorrow." "Big day," Jonathan agreed. As he watched Rebecca gently wake Grace and gather their things, he felt a bittersweet mix of emotions. Joy that this family was together again. Pride in what they had all accomplished. And a deep sadness that his home would be empty tomorrow. But also gratitude. Gratitude that he had stopped at that bench. Gratitude that he had not walked away. Because sometimes, saving someone else's life means saving your own. The morning of Grace's move, Jonathan woke early. The penthouse felt different already, as if it knew change was coming. He walked past the bedroom that had become Grace's, seeing the bare walls where her drawings had hung, the empty desk where she had done homework. Mrs. Sullivan arrived at 8 to help with the final preparations. She found Jonathan standing in Grace's doorway, staring at the sunflower quilt folded neatly on the bare mattress. "You're going to miss her," Mrs. Sullivan said softly. "More than I expected." "You know, Mr. Reed, when you first brought her home, I wasn't sure about any of this. I thought maybe you'd change your mind after a few days. But you surprised me." "How so?" "You didn't just help her. You let her help you. You let yourself care." Mrs. Sullivan touched his arm gently. "That takes courage." Rebecca and Grace arrived at 10. They came with empty boxes to pack Grace's belongings, though there was not much. The clothes they had bought together, some toys, books, art supplies. The physical evidence of 6 weeks that had changed everything. Grace packed slowly, carefully folding each item. When she got to the stuffed bear from her first night, She held it for a long moment. "Can I take this?" she asked Rebecca. "Of course, baby. It's yours." Jonathan gave it to me. "I want to remember." "You don't need a bear to remember," Jonathan said. "I'll see you Wednesday for dinner, remember? And I'll be at your school for the parent breakfast on Friday." "You're really coming to school stuff." "I told you. We're family. I'll be there for everything." By noon, everything was packed. Mrs. Sullivan had prepared sandwiches for lunch, insisting they eat before the drive to Aurora. They sat around the dining table one last time, making small talk that danced around the emotions none of them quite knew how to express. The doorbell rang just as they were finishing lunch. Jonathan was not expecting anyone. He opened the door to find a woman in her early 30s standing in the hallway. She had blonde hair darker than Rebecca's, wearing jeans and a worn winter coat. Her eyes were red, as if she had been crying. "I'm looking for Rebecca Turner," the woman said. "The doorman said she was here. I'm her sister." "Helen." Rebecca appeared in the doorway, her face going pale. "What are you doing here?" Helen's face crumpled. "I'm so sorry. I'm so sorry." The sisters stood frozen for a moment. Then Rebecca pulled Helen inside and hugged her fiercely. Both of them were crying. Grace emerged from the living room, her eyes wide. "Aunt Helen." "Grace." Helen broke away from Rebecca and knelt down. "Oh my God, Grace. You're okay. You're really okay. Why didn't you come back?" Grace asked, her voice small. "I wanted to. I tried to. But I didn't know where you were. The shelter wouldn't tell me anything because I'm not your legal guardian. I've been calling everyone, trying to find you." "How did you find us now?" Rebecca asked. "The news story. About the CEO who found a homeless girl on Christmas Eve and reunited her with her mother. I saw Grace's picture. I drove down from Breckenridge as soon as I could." Jonathan introduced himself and invited everyone to sit down. Helen's story came out in pieces, fragmented by tears and guilt. She had taken the teaching job in Breckenridge because it was the only position she could find with her qualifications. She was drowning in student loans and barely making ends meet. When Rebecca had the breakdown, Helen had tried to care for Grace, but she was working 2 jobs just to afford her tiny studio apartment. "I thought the shelter would be temporary," Helen said. "Just a few days until I figured something out. But then I got to Breckenridge and realized I couldn't afford to bring Grace with me. I couldn't even afford a 1-bedroom apartment. I was sleeping on a couch in the teacher's lounge some nights because I couldn't make rent." "Why didn't you tell me?" Rebecca asked. "Because you were in the hospital, trying to get better. I didn't want to add to your stress. I thought the social workers would place Grace in a good foster home. I thought she'd be okay until you recovered. I didn't know the shelter would close. I didn't know she'd end up on the street." "I waited for you," Grace said quietly. "At the bench. That's where Mama said we'd meet if we got separated." Helen covered her face with her hands. "I failed you. I failed both of you." Rebecca reached across the table and took her sister's hands. "You didn't fail us. You were drowning too. The whole system failed us. But Helen, we're okay now. Grace is okay. Look at her." Helen looked at Grace, really looked at her. Saw the healthy color in her cheeks, the nice clothes, the confidence in her posture. "You do look okay. Better than okay." "Jonathan and Mrs. Sullivan took care of me," Grace said. "They found Mama. They helped us." Helen turned to Jonathan, her expression a mixture of gratitude and bewilderment. "I don't understand. Why would you do all this for people you don't know?" Jonathan had been asked that question so many times in the past 6 weeks. He still did not have a perfect answer. "Because I could. Because no one else did. Because Grace deserved better than what she was getting. I can't thank you enough." "You don't have to thank me. But Helen, I do need to ask. Are you okay now? Are you stable?" Helen nodded. "Better than I was. I'm teaching full-time. I have an actual apartment now. Still small, but it's mine. I'm making payments on my loans. It's not much, but I'm managing." "Would you want to be part of Grace's life again?" Rebecca asked. "I know you had to make impossible choices. But if you want to." "Yes, Helen said immediately. Yes, I want to be in her life. Both your lives. I missed you so much. Grace got up from her chair and went to Helen, climbing into her lap like she used to do when she was younger. I missed you too, Aunt Helen. The adults talked for hours. Helen shared what she knew about Rebecca's phone call 3 months earlier. She had tried calling back repeatedly, but the number never worked again. She had even driven to Denver twice to search, but with no address and no contact information, she had not known where to look. I should have done more, Helen said. I should have kept trying. You did what you could, Jonathan said. You were dealing with your own crisis. This is what happens when people don't have safety nets. When one thing goes wrong, everything collapses. He told Helen about the Second Chances Network program, about the model they were building to help families like theirs. Helen listened with increasing interest. This is what we need, she said. Not judgment, not more bureaucracy, just actual help. That's the idea, Jonathan said. We're starting with housing assistance and job training, but we want to expand. Maybe even satellite programs in mountain towns like Breckenridge. I could help, Helen said. I'm a teacher. I work with kids from struggling families every day. I see how the system fails them. We could use someone with that perspective. The conversation shifted to logistics. Helen would drive down from Breckenridge every other weekend to spend time with Grace and Rebecca. She would help however she could. Maybe she could even relocate to Denver eventually if she found a teaching position. You don't have to move, Rebecca said. But it would be nice to have you closer. I want to be closer. I missed so much already. I don't want to miss any more. By late afternoon, it was time for Grace and Rebecca to head to their apartment. Helen offered to help them unpack. The three of them loaded boxes into 2 cars, a small family beginning to knit itself back together. Before they left, Grace hugged Jonathan tightly. Thank you for letting Aunt Helen find us. I didn't do anything. She found you on her own. But you made us easy to find. Because you told our story. Jonathan had not thought about it that way. The news coverage he had avoided had actually helped. It had brought Helen back into their lives. After they left, Mrs. Sullivan began cleaning the apartment, restoring it to its former pristine condition. Jonathan stopped her. Leave Grace's room, he said. Don't change it yet. Mr. Reed, she's not coming back to live here. I know. But leave it anyway. Just for a little while. That evening, Jonathan sat alone in his too-quiet penthouse. He picked up his phone and scrolled through photos from the past 6 weeks. Grace making cookies with Mrs. Sullivan. Grace reading on the couch. Grace laughing at something funny on television. Grace asleep in the car on the way back from Aurora. His phone rang. It was Thomas Wright. I saw Helen Morrison showed up, Thomas said. Small world. She saw the news coverage. She's been looking for them. Good. That family needs each other. Hey, I wanted to let you know, I got a call today from a mother in Colorado Springs. She saw the story about Grace and Rebecca. She lost custody of her son 2 years ago and hasn't been able to get him back. She asked if I could help. Can you? Maybe. But Jonathan, she's not the only one who called. I've gotten 7 calls this week. 7 families torn apart by the system, asking for help. What did you tell them? I told them about Second Chances Network. I gave them Dr. Chen's number. But these cases need more than programs. They need people who care enough to really help. Jonathan thought about that. 7 families. 7 stories like Grace and Rebecca's. How many more were out there, invisible and voiceless? I'll talk to Dr. Chen, Jonathan said. Maybe we need to expand faster than we planned. You sure you want to take this on? You've already done so much. Thomas, I found one little girl on a bench and it changed my life. Imagine what could happen if we found more of them. If we help more families rebuild. You're a good man, Jonathan Reed. I'm just a man who stopped walking. The next morning, Jonathan called an emergency meeting of the Second Chances Network Board. He proposed doubling their budget and expanding services immediately. Several board members expressed concern about growing too fast, but Jonathan was insistent. Every day we wait, more families fall through the cracks, he said. More children end up on benches. We have the resources. Let's use them. Dr. Chen supported the expansion. We've proven the model works. Rebecca and Grace are thriving. Helen is back in their lives. They have stability now because someone invested in them. Let's do that for others. The board voted unanimously to approve the expansion. Over the next week, Jonathan split his time between his business and the nonprofit. He hired additional staff for Second Chances Network. They secured more housing units, partnered with more employers, brought on more therapists and counselors. He also made good on his promise to Grace. Wednesday evening, he drove to Aurora and had dinner with Grace, Rebecca, and Helen in their small apartment. They ate spaghetti that Grace had helped cook, crowded around a table meant for two. "Tell me about school," Jonathan said to Grace. "You start next week, right?" Monday. "I'm nervous." "Why?" "What if the other kids don't like me? What if they find out I was homeless?" Helen spoke up. "Grace, lots of kids have hard stories. What matters is who you are now. And you're smart and kind and brave." "Aunt Helen's right," Rebecca said. "And if anyone is mean, you tell me or Jonathan or Mrs. Sullivan. We'll handle it." "Mrs. Sullivan wants to volunteer in your classroom," Jonathan added. "She told me today. She misses having you around." Grace's face lit up. "Really? That would be so cool." After dinner, while Rebecca and Helen cleaned up, Jonathan and Grace sat on the small balcony. It was cold, but Grace wanted to show him the view. You could see a small park from there and part of the Denver skyline in the distance. "Do you like living here?" Jonathan asked. "I like being with Mama and Aunt Helen. But I miss your big windows. And I miss Mrs. Sullivan's cooking." "You can visit anytime. And Mrs. Sullivan said she'll teach your Mama some recipes." "Jonathan, can I ask you something?" "Always." "Are you lonely now? In your big apartment by yourself?" The question caught him off guard. Leave it to a 7-year-old to cut straight to the truth. "A little," he admitted. "But I'm okay. And I'm not really alone. I have you and Mrs. Sullivan, and now all the work with the program. I'm busier than I've ever been." "But busy isn't the same as happy." "No, it's not. But helping people makes me happy. Seeing you with your mama makes me happy." Grace leaned against his side. "You should get a family of your own. You'd be a good dad." "Maybe someday." "I think you're already kind of like a dad. Just not the regular kind." Jonathan felt his throat tighten. "Thank you, Grace. That means a lot." On Friday, Jonathan attended the parent breakfast at Grace's new school. She had been nervous about starting at a new place where no one knew her, but Mrs. Sullivan's presence in the classroom had helped. Other parents were friendly, welcoming. Grace introduced Jonathan to her teacher, Ms. Davis, a young woman with bright eyes and genuine warmth. "Grace has told me so much about you," Ms. Davis said. "About how you found her and helped her family." "Grace is special," Jonathan said. "Any teacher would be lucky to have her." During the breakfast, Jonathan sat with Grace and her classmates. The children asked questions about his job, about his tall building downtown, about what it was like to be a CEO. Jonathan answered simply, making them laugh with stories about boring meetings and too much paperwork. One little boy asked, "Are you Grace's dad?" "I'm her friend," Jonathan said. "A very good friend." "He's like family," Grace added. "He just doesn't live with us." That satisfied the children. They returned to eating muffins and fruit. As Jonathan was leaving, Ms. Davis stopped him. "Mr. Reed, thank you for what you've done for Grace and her family. And thank you for the Second Chances program. My sister just enrolled. She lost her kids 2 years ago and has been fighting to get them back. Your program is the first real help she's gotten." Jonathan took her hand. "Tell your sister we're here for her, whatever she needs." Walking back to his car, Jonathan felt the weight of responsibility settling over him. So many people needed help. So many families were barely holding on. The program was growing. But would it be enough? His phone buzzed with a text from Grace. "Thank you for coming today. You made me feel brave." Jonathan smiled. Maybe it would be enough. One family at a time. One brave little girl at a time. They were changing the world together. Thomas Wright called Jonathan on a Tuesday morning with unexpected news. "I've been doing follow-up research on Rebecca's case," Thomas said, "making sure there aren't any loose ends that could cause problems later. I found something interesting." "What?" "The treatment facility in Colorado Springs where Rebecca was a patient? They have a notation in her file about a woman who visited her during her stay. Someone named Margaret Delacroix. She wasn't family, and she wasn't a social worker. The staff noted it because it was unusual. Most patients in mental health crisis don't get visitors outside of family." "Who is Margaret Delacroix?" "That's what I've been trying to figure out. She's not in any of the standard databases. But I did some digging. She runs a private foundation called the Delacroix Family Foundation. They fund mental health initiatives, addiction recovery programs, family services. Very low profile, very selective about who they help." "Why would she visit Rebecca?" "That's the million-dollar question. I called the treatment center. The staff remembers her. They said she spent several hours with Rebecca, multiple visits over the course of 2 weeks. They thought maybe she was a relative who didn't want to be listed as family for privacy reasons." Jonathan felt a tingle of intuition. "Can you find her?" "Already did. She lives in Cherry Hills Village. I have a phone number. Call her. Tell her I'd like to meet." "Jonathan, this might be nothing. Maybe she was just a volunteer. Or maybe she knows something that could help us understand what happened to Rebecca. Either way, I want to know." Thomas made the call. Margaret Delacroix agreed to meet Jonathan that same afternoon at a coffee shop in Cherry Hills Village. She sounded cautious on the phone, but willing to talk. Jonathan arrived 15 minutes early and spotted her immediately. Margaret Delacroix was in her 60s, with silver hair pulled into an elegant bun, wearing a simple but expensive burgundy sweater. She had the quiet confidence of someone who had seen a lot of life and come through it with grace. "Mr. Reed," she said, extending her hand. "Thank you for meeting with me." They ordered coffee and sat by the window. Margaret studied him carefully before speaking. "Your investigator said you're the man who found Rebecca Turner's daughter," she said. "I am. Grace is living with her mother now. They are doing well." "I'm glad to hear that. I wondered what happened to Grace." "How do you know Rebecca?" Margaret took a sip of her coffee, considering her words. "I run a foundation that supports women in crisis. About 10 years ago, I went through my own dark time. Depression, loss, the kind of pain that makes you question everything. I was fortunate. I had resources, support, access to excellent treatment. I recovered, and I decided to help other women who were going through similar struggles but didn't have those advantages." "So you visited Rebecca at the treatment center?" "I did. The facility director is a friend. She knows I sometimes visit patients who she thinks might benefit from talking to someone who's been through it. When Rebecca arrived, broken and terrified of losing her daughter permanently, my friend thought I might be able to help." "What did you talk about?" Margaret smiled sadly. "Everything. Her childhood, her parents' deaths, the depression that swallowed her, her fear that she was failing Grace, her determination to get better. Rebecca was one of the most courageous women I've ever met. She was fighting so hard to become whole again." "Did you help her financially?" "I offered to. She refused. Very firmly. She said she needed to rebuild her life on her own, to prove to herself and to the system that she could be stable. I respected that, even though it worried me." "Why did it worry you?" "Because pride can be dangerous when you're in crisis. Sometimes accepting help is the bravest thing you can do." But Rebecca was determined. She completed her program at the facility, made her plan for reunification with Grace, and left. I gave her my card and told her to call if she ever needed anything. She never called. Jonathan pulled out his phone and showed Margaret a recent photo of Rebecca and Grace together. She made it. It was hard, and she almost didn't, but she made it. Margaret's eyes filled with tears. "I'm so glad. I've thought about her often. I wondered if she was okay." "She's more than okay. She's thriving. She has her daughter back. Her sister is back in her life. She's building a real future." "What changed?" "When I last saw her, the system had her trapped. How did she break free?" Jonathan told the story. Finding Grace on the bench. The search for Rebecca. The transitional housing. The careful reunification. The support system they had built. Margaret listened intently, occasionally wiping her eyes. You gave her something the system never could, Margaret said. You gave her grace. No pun intended. I just tried to help. You did more than help. You created a model for how these situations should be handled. With compassion instead of judgment. With resources instead of barriers. Margaret leaned forward. Tell me about this Second Chances network I've been reading about. Jonathan explained the program, the expansion, the growing number of families they were serving. Margaret asked detailed questions about funding, structure, outcomes. She had the mind of someone who understood nonprofits from the inside. You're doing remarkable work, she said finally. But you're going to hit capacity soon. The need is infinite. Your resources, however generous, are not. I know. We're already getting more applications than we can handle. What if you had additional funding? What if you could double your reach? That would be incredible. But the Delacroix Foundation would like to partner with Second Chances Network. A $5 million grant over 3 years, with the possibility of renewal. Jonathan stared at her. That's extraordinarily generous. It's strategic. Your model works. You've proven it with Rebecca and Grace. You're proving it with every family you help. My foundation's mission aligns perfectly with yours. This is exactly the kind of program we want to support. I don't know what to say. Say yes. Say you'll use the money to help more families like Rebecca's. Say you'll keep changing the system from the inside. Yes, Jonathan said immediately. Absolutely yes. Margaret smiled. Good. I'll have my people contact Dr. Chen tomorrow to start the paperwork. But Jonathan, I want something in return. Anything. I want to meet Rebecca and Grace. I want to see the family I worried about thriving. Would that be possible? I think Rebecca would love that. They exchanged contact information and made plans. Before they parted, Margaret touched Jonathan's arm. You know, when I first went through my crisis, I felt completely alone. I thought no one could understand. But then people showed up for me. People who had been through it themselves. That's what we need more of. People who've survived the darkness, helping others find their way out. That's what you're doing for Rebecca. And that's what you're doing for so many families. Don't underestimate the impact of one person who refuses to walk away. After leaving the coffee shop, Jonathan drove to Aurora to tell Rebecca about Margaret. He found her and Grace making dinner together in their small kitchen. Helen was there too, having driven down for the week to help with Grace's school adjustment. I met someone today who knows you, Jonathan said to Rebecca. Margaret Delacroix. Rebecca's wooden spoon clattered into the pot. Margaret? How did you find her? My investigator discovered she visited you at the treatment facility. I wanted to understand the connection. Rebecca sat down at the table, her hands shaking slightly. Margaret saved my life. Not literally, but emotionally. When I was at that facility, I was so broken. I thought I'd never be a good mother again. Margaret came to visit and told me her story. She'd been where I was. She'd recovered. She'd built a beautiful life. She made me believe it was possible. She wants to see you again. She wants to meet Grace. Really? Rebecca's eyes filled with tears. I thought about calling her so many times. But I was ashamed. I'd refused her help and then struggled so much. I thought she'd be disappointed in me. She's not disappointed. She's proud. And Rebecca, her foundation is donating $5 million to Second Chances Network. Because of you. Because you proved the model works. Rebecca covered her mouth with her hand. Because of me. Because of your courage. Because you never gave up on Grace. Because you showed what's possible when people get real support. Helen put her arm around her sister. You did that, Becca. You changed things for so many people. I didn't do anything special. I just tried to be a good mother. That is something special, Grace said, coming over to hug Rebecca. You're the best mama. They arranged for Margaret to visit the following weekend. In the meantime, Jonathan worked with Dr. Chen to plan how to use the additional funding. They decided to open a second location in Colorado Springs and begin exploring satellite programs in mountain communities like Breckenridge. "We're actually going to do this," Dr. Chen said during one planning meeting. "We're going to change how the system works." "We already are," Jonathan said. "One family at a time." That Friday, Jonathan attended Grace's school for a parent volunteer event. Mrs. Sullivan was there too, helping in the classroom. Grace beamed with pride, introducing him to her friends, showing him her art projects on the wall. During lunch, Ms. Davis pulled Jonathan aside. "I wanted to give you an update on my sister," she said. "She's been working with Second Chances for 3 weeks now. She has housing. She's in therapy. She's following all her court requirements. And yesterday, she had her first supervised visit with her kids in 18 months. How did it go?" She said it was the best day of her life. Her kids remembered her. They hugged her. They asked when she could come home. Ms. Davis's voice cracked. "Your program is giving her a real chance. Before this, she was lost in the system. Now she has hope. I'm glad we could help." "You're not just helping. You're transforming lives. My sister isn't the only one. I've heard stories from other families in the program. People who were invisible are being seen. People who were written off are getting second chances." After school, Jonathan took Grace and Rebecca to the treatment facility in Colorado Springs. Rebecca had agreed to speak at a support group there, to share her story with women who were going through what she had experienced. The drive took about an hour. Grace sat in the back seat, reading a book for school. Rebecca was quiet, nervous about returning to the place where she had been so broken. "You don't have to do this if you're not ready," Jonathan said. "I am ready. These women need to hear that recovery is possible, that they can get their lives back." The facility looked different than Rebecca remembered. Or maybe she was different. Last time she had walked through these doors, she had been shattered. Now she was whole. The support group met in a comfortable room with couches and chairs arranged in a circle. About 15 women of various ages sat waiting. Some looked hopeful. Others looked defeated. All of them looked tired. Rebecca took a seat in the circle. Grace sat beside Jonathan in the back of the room, watching her mother with pride. "My name is Rebecca," she began. 6 months ago, I was a patient here. I was suicidal. I'd lost my apartment, my job, my daughter. I thought I'd never be okay again." She told her story honestly. The depression after her parents died. The spiral into homelessness. The breakdown that landed her here. The long climb back to stability. "I'm not going to lie to you," Rebecca said. "Recovery is hard. There were days I wanted to give up. Days when I thought the system would never let me have my daughter back. Days when I felt like I was failing at everything." "How did you keep going?" one woman asked. "I kept going because of my daughter. Because I made her a promise. And because people showed up to help me. Not just the therapists and social workers, though they were important. But ordinary people who saw me struggling and didn't walk away. People who gave me chances when I didn't deserve them." Rebecca told them about Jonathan finding Grace on the bench. About Mrs. Sullivan welcoming them both. About Thomas Wright searching tirelessly. About the Second Chances Network program that gave her resources without judgment. "I'm not special," Rebecca said. "I'm just a mother who loved her daughter enough to fight for her. And I want you to know that you can fight too. You can recover. You can rebuild. You deserve second chances." After she finished speaking, several women had questions. What resources had helped most? How long did it take to reunite with Grace? What does she do when she feels the depression creeping back? Rebecca answered each question thoughtfully, sharing both her struggles and her strategies. When the group ended, several women approached her privately, thanking her for her honesty, asking for contact information. One woman, probably in her 30s with haunted eyes, said, "I have 2 sons, 8 and 10. I haven't seen them in a year. Do you really think I can get them back?" "I know you can," Rebecca said. "If you do the work, if you accept help, if you don't give up, it's possible. I'm living proof." On the drive back to Denver, Grace was full of questions. "Mama, were you really that sad?" she asked. I was, baby, sadder than I ever want to be again. But you're not sad anymore. Not like that. I still have hard days. But I have tools now to handle them. And I have you and Aunt Helen and Jonathan and Mrs. Sullivan. I'm not alone anymore. You were never alone, Grace said firmly. I was always waiting for you. Rebecca reached back and squeezed her daughter's hand. I know you were. That's what kept me alive. Saturday morning, Margaret Delacroix came to visit. She brought flowers and a children's book for Grace. They sat in Rebecca's small apartment, drinking tea and catching up. Margaret wanted to know everything. How Rebecca had managed to navigate transitional housing. What challenges she still faced. How Grace was adjusting to school. What support systems they had in place. I'm so proud of you, Margaret said to Rebecca. When I visited you at the facility, I hoped you'd make it. But I wasn't sure. The system is so stacked against women like us. It is, Rebecca agreed. But I had advantages this time. I had Jonathan fighting for me. I had resources. Most women don't have that. Which is why the Second Chances program is so important, Margaret said. It gives women those advantages. It levels the playing field. Grace, who had been coloring quietly at the table, looked up. Are you the lady who helped Mama when she was sick? I tried to help, Margaret said. Your Mama did the hard work herself. Can I show you something? Grace got up and retrieved the photograph of her and Rebecca in their red dresses. This is from before, when we were happy, and now we're happy again. Margaret studied the photo. You're both beautiful. And Grace, I'm so glad your Mama found her way back to you. Jonathan found me, Grace said, on the bench in the snow. And then he found Mama. And now we're family again. Plus we have Aunt Helen and Mrs. Sullivan and Jonathan. It's a bigger family than before. That's the best kind of family, Margaret said. One that grows to include people who love you. Before Margaret left, she pulled Jonathan aside. I want to do more. The $5 million for the program is just the start. I've been thinking about creating a scholarship fund for children like Grace. Kids who've been through trauma, but are resilient. Kids who deserve opportunities. Grace would love that. She wants to be a nurse like her mother someday. Then let's make sure she has every opportunity to achieve that dream. That evening, Jonathan returned to his penthouse. For the first time in weeks, the empty space did not feel lonely. It felt peaceful. He had found his purpose. He thought about all the people whose lives had intersected because he stopped at a bench 6 weeks ago. Rebecca, Grace, Helen, Margaret, Dr. Chen, the families in the program, the women at the support group. Ripples spreading outward from one moment of choosing compassion over convenience. His phone buzzed with a text from Grace. Thank you for bringing Ms. Margaret to meet us. Mama is happy crying. The good kind. Jonathan smiled. Happy crying. The good kind. There was a lot of that going around lately. He looked out his floor-to-ceiling windows at the Denver skyline. Somewhere out there, other children were struggling. Other families were falling apart. Other people needed help. But now there was a network of support waiting for them. A system that worked. A community that cared. And it had all started with one little girl on a bench, one man who stopped, and one promise kept. 3 months passed. Winter melted into early spring. Grace thrived in school, making friends and bringing home artwork that Rebecca displayed proudly on their refrigerator. Rebecca's job at the medical supply company led to a promotion. Helen visited every other weekend, becoming a constant presence in their lives. The apartment in Aurora had transformed into a real home, filled with laughter and the ordinary rhythms of family life. Second Chances network grew exponentially. With Margaret Delacroix's funding, they opened the Colorado Springs location and began planning programs in Breckenridge and Fort Collins. They had helped 37 families reunite, with another 50 in various stages of the program. Success stories appeared in the local news regularly. But Jonathan knew the work was far from over. He sat in his office at the Second Chances headquarters on a Wednesday morning, reviewing case files with Dr. Chen. Each folder represented a family torn apart by circumstances beyond their control. Each one needed individualized support. This one breaks my heart, Dr. Chen said, holding up a file. Mother of 3 in Grand Junction. Lost her kids 2 years ago after a car accident left her with chronic pain and an opioid addiction. She's been clean for 8 months, working 2 jobs, but the courts won't even grant supervised visits. Why not? Past history. The judge doesn't believe people can change. He's seen too many relapses. Can we help? We could provide her with an attorney, document her recovery, create a support structure that proves she's stable. But Jonathan, even with all that, she might not get her kids back. Some judges just won't budge. Then we find a way to change their minds. Or we change the laws. Whatever it takes. Dr. Chen smiled. You're relentless, you know that. I learned from a 7-year-old girl who spent 6 months waiting on a bench for her mother. If Grace didn't give up, neither can we. His phone rang. It was Thomas Wright. Jonathan, I need to tell you about something. I've been tracking a pattern in family separation cases across Colorado. There's a judge in Jefferson County who has separated more families than any other judge in the state. Judge Patricia Williams. She has a reputation for harsh rulings, especially against mothers with mental health issues. How harsh? She terminated parental rights in a case last month where the mother had been stable for over a year. The woman had housing, employment, completed treatment. All the boxes checked. Judge Williams said she didn't trust the long-term prognosis. Jonathan felt anger rising. That's exactly the kind of thinking that almost kept Grace and Rebecca apart. I know. And there are dozens of cases like it. Families destroyed because one judge decided recovery wasn't possible. What can we do about it? There's a judicial review process. If enough evidence of bias is presented, she could be removed from family court cases. But it would take time, resources, and testimony from affected families. Set up a meeting with affected families. Let's see if they are willing to speak out. Thomas arranged a meeting for the following week. 12 families came, each with heartbreaking stories of interactions with Judge Williams. Mothers who had done everything right, but were still denied their children. Fathers fighting addiction who were written off before they had a chance to prove their recovery. Grandparents trying to gain custody of grandchildren who were told they were too old. One mother, a woman named Katie Harrison, told her story through tears. I lost my daughter when I had postpartum depression. I was hospitalized, got treatment, became stable. That was 3 years ago. Judge Williams won't even consider returning custody. She said I'll always be a mental health risk. My daughter is growing up in foster care, thinking I abandoned her. I didn't abandon her. The system did. Jonathan took notes on each story, seeing the pattern clearly. Judge Williams operated from a belief that people couldn't change, that past struggles defined future capability. It was the opposite of everything second chances stood for. Would you all be willing to testify about your experiences? Jonathan asked. To go on record with your stories. The families looked at each other nervously. Speaking out against a judge was risky. It could make their situations worse. I'll do it, Katie said. What do I have to lose? She's already taken my daughter. Maybe if I speak up, other families won't go through this. One by one, the others agreed. Jonathan called a press conference for the following week. He invited local media and made a carefully worded statement about systemic bias in family court. He did not attack Judge Williams directly, but he presented the data Thomas had compiled. The statistics were damning. The story went viral. National news picked it up. Suddenly, people across the country were talking about family separation, judicial bias, and the need for reform. Judge Williams was placed on administrative leave pending investigation. You've made some powerful enemies, Dr. Chen warned Jonathan. The judicial system doesn't like being criticized. I don't care. These families deserve justice. But there was backlash. Jonathan received threats. Anonymous letters calling him a troublemaker. Business associates distanced themselves, worried about being associated with controversy. One major investor pulled out of a property deal, costing Jonathan's company millions. Mrs. Sullivan found him in his office late one night, staring at hate mail. Second thoughts, she asked gently. Never. But I didn't anticipate this level of hostility. You're threatening the status quo. People don't like that. The status quo destroys families. I know. And you're doing the right thing. But Mr. Reed, you need to be prepared for this to get worse before it gets better. She was right. 2 days later, a conservative political group ran attack ads against Second Chances Network, claiming it was enabling irresponsible parents and undermining family values. The ads were full of misinformation, but they were effective. Donations slowed. Some corporate sponsors withdrew support. Jonathan called an emergency board meeting. Several members suggested pulling back, focusing on the program without the political advocacy. We can't stay silent, Jonathan argued. If we don't fight for systemic change, we're just putting band-aids on bullet wounds. But we're losing support, one board member said. If we continue on this path, we might lose everything. Margaret Delacroix spoke up. We might lose financial support temporarily, but we'll gain something more important, credibility with the families we serve. They'll know we're willing to fight for them, not just help them within a broken system. The board voted to continue the advocacy work. But the next few weeks were brutal. More sponsors pulled out. Negative editorials appeared in newspapers. Jonathan's business partners pressured him to step back from Second Chances. Through it all, the families they had helped stood by them. Rebecca wrote an op-ed for the Denver Post, sharing her story and defending the program. Other families followed suit. Local churches and community organizations rallied support. Grace, in her own way, helped too. She drew a picture in school of Jonathan saving her from the bench and gave a presentation about kindness to her class. Her teacher submitted it to a local art contest focused on community heroes. Grace won first place, and the story was picked up by news outlets as a feel-good counter to the negative coverage. You're famous now, Jonathan teased her at dinner one evening. I just told the truth, Grace said. You did save me. And Mema. And lots of other families. A lot of people don't see it that way right now. Then those people are wrong. Grace's fierce loyalty made Jonathan's eyes sting. 6 weeks after the press conference, the Judicial Review Board completed its investigation. Judge Patricia Williams was removed from family court cases and reassigned to civil litigation. Several of her rulings were reversed, and families were granted new hearings with different judges. Katie Harrison was one of them. With Second Chances providing legal support and documentation of her stability, she was granted supervised visits with her daughter. The little girl, now 5 years old, didn't remember her mother at first. But slowly, through consistent visits and gentle patience, they began to rebuild their relationship. I get to see her twice a week now, Katie told Jonathan, tears of joy streaming down her face. She called me Mama yesterday. For the first time in 3 years, she called me Mama. The victory felt enormous. But Jonathan knew it was just one battle in a much larger war. Second Chances Network continued to grow, more carefully now but steadily. They helped families navigate court systems, provided resources for reunification, advocated for policy changes. Every success felt like a miracle. Every failure felt like a personal defeat. Jonathan found himself working 18-hour days, unable to walk away from the constant stream of families needing help. Mrs. Sullivan worried about him. You're going to burn out, she said. You can't save everyone. I have to try. No, you don't. You need to accept that some situations are beyond your control. You need to let the system work. The system doesn't work. That's the whole problem. Then change it. But don't destroy yourself in the process. He knew she was right. But every time he thought about pulling back, he remembered Grace on that bench. He remembered what would have happened if he had walked past her. One evening, he attended a fundraiser for Second Chances. The event was held at a hotel ballroom, with speeches and presentations about the program's impact. Rebecca and Grace were there, along with Helen and several other families who had been helped. During the reception, a woman approached Jonathan. She was middle-aged, well-dressed, with kind eyes and a nervous smile. Mr. Reed, I'm Jennifer Bradley. I wanted to thank you. Have we met? Not exactly, but you changed my life anyway. I'm a foster parent. I've had my foster daughter, Emma, for 2 years. Her mother, Rachel, is in your program. She's been working so hard to get clean, to find housing, to prove she can be a good parent. Last month, thanks to Second Chances, the court granted her reunification. Emma goes home next week. Jonathan could see the emotion in Jennifer's eyes. That must be hard for you. After 2 years. It's bittersweet. I love Emma like she's my own. But she belongs with her mother. Rachel has worked for this. She's earned this second chance. And because of your program, I know Emma will have support even after she goes home. Rachel isn't being thrown back into the same situation that caused her to lose Emma in the first place. She has resources, stability, a safety net. That's the goal. To make reunification sustainable. You're doing more than that. You're giving families hope. You're showing that people can change, that the system can work if we build it right. Jennifer reached out and squeezed his hand. Thank you for believing in families like Rachel's. Thank you for not giving up. After she walked away, Jonathan felt the weight of the past few months lift slightly. This was why they fought. This was why the backlash, the threats, the financial struggles were worth it. Later that evening, Rebecca took the stage to speak. Grace sat in the front row, beaming with pride. 6 months ago, I was broken, Rebecca began. I'd lost everything that mattered, including my daughter. I thought my story was over. But then Jonathan Reed found Grace on a bench, and everything changed. Not because he's wealthy or powerful, though that helped, but because he cared. Because he refused to accept that our situation was hopeless. She talked about her journey, about the support she had received, about the program that had given her tools instead of judgment. I'm not here tonight just to thank second chances, Rebecca said. I'm here to challenge all of you. Look around. In this room are families who were written off by the system. Families who were told they'd never be whole again. But they are whole. They are thriving. And there are thousands more out there who need the same chance we got. She paused, looking directly at Jonathan. One person really can make a difference. Jonathan proved that. But imagine what we could do together. Imagine if every person in this room committed to helping one family. Just one. That's hundreds of families who could be reunited. Hundreds of children who could go home. The room erupted in applause. People stood. By the end of the evening, they had raised $3 million and recruited 50 new volunteers. Grace approached Jonathan as the event was ending. You look happy. I am happy. Good. You've been sad lately. I could tell. How could you tell? You get this look in your eyes. Like you're far away thinking about something hard. But tonight you look like you again. Jonathan knelt down to her level. You know what? You're pretty smart for a 7-year-old. I'm almost 8, Grace said proudly. My birthday is next month. I know. What do you want? A party. With Mama, and Aunt Helen and Mrs. Sullivan and you. And my friends from school. And maybe Margaret. And maybe some of the other families from the program. I want everyone together. That sounds perfect. And you know what else I want? What? I want you to be happy like this all the time. Not just at parties. Jonathan hugged her. I'll work on that. As he drove home that night, Jonathan thought about Grace's words. She was right. He had been carrying the weight of every family he couldn't help, every system he couldn't change fast enough. He had been so focused on the battles that he had forgotten to celebrate the victories. They had helped 37 families reunite. 37 children were home with their parents because of Second Chances Network. Judge Williams was off the bench. Policies were beginning to change. The model was spreading to other states. It wasn't everything, but it was something. And sometimes, something was enough. Spring arrived in full force, bringing warm sunshine and the smell of blooming flowers to Denver. Grace's 8th birthday approached, and planning for her party became a community effort. Rebecca insisted on hosting it at their apartment, despite its small size. This is our home, Rebecca said when Jonathan offered to rent a venue. I want Grace to celebrate in the place where we rebuilt our life together. Jonathan understood. The apartment in Aurora was more than just a place to live. It was a symbol of their recovery, their resilience, their new beginning. Mrs. Sullivan took charge of the cake, promising something special. Helen drove down from Breckenridge with homemade decorations. Margaret Delacroix sent a generous check with instructions to make it magical. The Second Chances Network staff contributed supplies for games and activities. The guest list grew beyond what the small apartment could reasonably hold. Grace wanted to invite her classmates, her teacher Ms. Davis, the families from Second Chances she had met, Thomas Wright, Dr. Chen, Barbara the social worker, even Dr. Martinez from the Family Counseling Center. Everyone who had played a role in bringing her family back together. "We're going to need a bigger space," Rebecca admitted. Jonathan made a suggestion. "What if we use the community center near your apartment? It's run by the city, but I know the director. We could reserve it for the afternoon." "That costs money." "Rebecca, please. Let me do this for Grace." Rebecca hesitated, then nodded. "Okay, but I'm making the food. That's non-negotiable." "Deal." The week before the party, Jonathan received an unexpected phone call from a woman named Sandra Martinez in Grand Junction. She was the mother Dr. Chen had mentioned months ago, the one fighting to regain custody of her 3 children after overcoming opioid addiction. "Mr. Reed, I wanted to tell you personally," Sandra said, her voice thick with emotion. "The judge granted reunification. My kids are coming home next week." Jonathan felt a surge of joy. "Sandra, that's wonderful. Congratulations. I couldn't have done it without Second Chances. The attorney you provided, the documented support system, the housing assistance. It made all the difference. For the first time, the court saw me as a person, not just an addict. You did the hard work. We just helped remove obstacles. You did more than that. You gave me hope when I had none left. And Mr. Reed, I want to do what Rebecca did. I want to help other families. I'm thinking about training to become a peer support specialist. Someone who's been through it, helping others going through it now. That's exactly what we need. More people like you and Rebecca who understand from the inside." After hanging up, Jonathan shared the news with Dr. Chen. She added Sandra's name to a growing list of program graduates who are becoming advocates and mentors. "This is how we scale," Dr. Chen said. "Not just by adding staff, but by empowering the people we help to help others. They have credibility we'll never have." The model was working. Families who had been reunited were now volunteering at Second Chances, sharing their stories, guiding others through the process. Rebecca had become one of the program's most effective spokespersons, speaking at events and meeting with legislators about policy reform. But not every story had a happy ending. 2 days before Grace's party, Jonathan received devastating news. One of the families in the program, a father named Michael Turner who had been fighting to regain custody of his son after beating addiction, had relapsed. He was arrested for possession, and his reunification case was suspended indefinitely. Jonathan felt the failure personally. They had provided Michael with resources, counseling, support. It hadn't been enough. Recovery isn't linear, Dr. Chen reminded him. Michael was doing well, but addiction is powerful. One setback doesn't mean he's lost forever. It might mean he's lost his son forever. Maybe. Or maybe this is a wake-up call that leads to even deeper recovery. We don't know how his story ends yet. Jonathan knew she was right, but it still hurt. Every failure felt like a reminder of how fragile these reunifications were, how easily things could fall apart. He almost canceled attending Grace's party, feeling too discouraged. But Mrs. Sullivan wouldn't let him. "That little girl wants you there," she said firmly. "She's not celebrating just her birthday. She's celebrating family, including you. Don't you dare disappoint her because you're wallowing in self-pity." The bluntness shocked Jonathan. Mrs. Sullivan rarely spoke to him so directly. "I'm not wallowing." "Yes, you are. You're so focused on the one family you couldn't help that you're forgetting the dozens you did help. Michael's relapse is tragic, but it's not your fault. And it doesn't erase Katie Harrison getting her daughter back, or Sandra Martinez reuniting with her children, or Rebecca and Grace being together. You need to remember why you're doing this work." She was right. He knew she was right. Saturday arrived sunny and warm. The community center was transformed with colorful streamers, balloons, and a banner that read "Happy 8th Birthday, Grace." Tables were set up with food that Rebecca and Helen had prepared, sandwiches, fruit, chips, and punch. Mrs. Sullivan's cake sat as the centerpiece, 3 layers decorated with flowers and butterflies. Guests arrived throughout the early afternoon. Grace's classmates came first, a noisy group of 8-year-olds running around the center's playground. Ms. Davis arrived with her sister Rachel, the one who had been reunited with her daughter Emma through second chances. Katie Harrison came with her 5-year-old daughter, who now called her Mama consistently. Sandra Martinez drove in from Grand Junction with her 3 children. Other families from the program arrived, children laughing and playing together while parents swapped stories and support. Margaret Delacroix arrived dressed casually in jeans and a bright green blouse, carrying an enormous gift wrapped in silver paper. Thomas Wright brought his wife and teenage daughter. Even Barbara the social worker came, bringing a board game as a gift. Jonathan stood near the entrance, watching people arrive, and felt something shift in his chest. This wasn't just a birthday party. This was a celebration of everything they had built together. A community of people who refused to give up on families. Grace was radiant in a red dress that matched the one from the photograph. She ran from group to group, hugging people, showing her friends around, introducing everyone to each other. "Look, Mama," she called. Everyone came. "Everyone I love is here." Rebecca stood with Helen, both of them teary-eyed. "I can't believe this," Rebecca said. "A year ago, I was in a treatment facility, terrified I'd never see my daughter again. Now look at this." "You earned this," Helen said. "You fought for it." When it was time for cake, everyone gathered around. Grace stood in front of the candles, Jonathan on one side and Rebecca on the other. Mrs. Sullivan led everyone in singing Happy Birthday. "Make a wish," Rebecca said. Grace closed her eyes, her face scrunched in concentration. Then she blew out all 8 candles in one breath. Everyone cheered. "What did you wish for?" one of her classmates asked. "I can't tell you or it won't come true," Grace said. But she looked directly at Jonathan and smiled. Later, he pulled her aside. "Okay, you have to tell me. What did you wish for?" "I wish that everyone here would always be happy like they are today. That no more families would have to be apart. That people would keep helping each other." "That's a good wish. Do you think it'll come true?" "I think we can make it come true. All of us together." As the party continued, Jonathan found himself in conversations with the families who had been helped by second chances. Each had a story. Each had struggled. Each had found their way back together with support. Rachel, Ms. Davis's sister, told him about the first night her daughter Emma had come home. She was scared at first. She didn't remember our old routines. But I read her a story, and she fell asleep in my arms, and I thought, this is worth every hard day. Every struggle, every moment of doubt. You gave me that moment, Mr. Reed. Katie Harrison shared how her daughter had started calling her Mama again. It didn't happen right away. For weeks, she called me Katie. But last Tuesday, she scraped her knee at the playground and ran to me crying, "Mama, Mama, it hurts." And my heart just exploded with joy. I have my baby back. Sandra Martinez introduced her children, who were shy but clearly happy. "They've adjusted better than I expected," she said. "We're in family therapy, working through things. But we're together. That's what matters." Even the families still working through the program shared hope. A father named Daniel who was 2 months into supervised visits with his twins. A mother named Lisa who had just secured housing and was preparing for her reunification hearing. They all believed now that reunion was possible. Dr. Chen pulled Jonathan aside during the party. "Do you see this? This is what we're building. Not just a program, but a community. These families are supporting each other now. They are becoming each other's safety nets." It's more than I imagined when I found Grace on that bench. One act of compassion created ripples that are still spreading. That's the power of not walking away. Toward the end of the party, Rebecca asked for everyone's attention. Grace stood beside her mother, holding her hand. "I want to say something," Rebecca began, her voice wavering with emotion. "A year ago, my life was falling apart. I'd lost my apartment, my job, my sense of self. Worst of all, I was separated from my daughter. I thought I'd failed at the most important thing in my life, being a mother." She paused, looking at Grace, who squeezed her hand. Then Jonathan Reed found Grace on a bench in the snow. And instead of just calling authorities and walking away, he stayed. He searched for me. He gave Grace a safe home while I got help. He didn't judge me for my struggles. He saw a family worth saving. Rebecca's voice broke. Helen put an arm around her sister's shoulders. But Jonathan didn't stop with us, Rebecca continued. He created Second Chances Network so other families could have what we have. Standing in this room are parents who thought they'd never hold their children again. Children who thought their families were broken forever. And we're all here, together, because someone decided that families deserve second chances. She turned to Jonathan. You changed our lives. All of our lives. And we want to thank you. Everyone began clapping. Jonathan felt his throat tighten, overwhelmed by the emotion in the room. Grace stepped forward and held out a wrapped package. We all made something for you, she said. Jonathan opened it carefully. Inside was a scrapbook. The cover read The Family You Built. As he paged through it, he saw photos and notes from all the families in Second Chances. Pictures of parents and children reunited. Drawings from kids. Letters thanking him for not giving up. One page had Grace's handwriting. Thank you for stopping at the bench. Thank you for finding Mama. Thank you for showing me that good people exist. Love, Grace. Jonathan couldn't speak. He just held the scrapbook and tried not to cry in front of everyone. Mrs. Sullivan rescued him. All right, everyone. There's still cake left and games to play. Let's keep this party going. The crowd dispersed back into smaller groups. Jonathan stepped outside for a moment to collect himself. Margaret Delacroix followed him out. That was quite a moment, she said. I didn't expect it. You should have. Do you realize what you've created? Not just a program, but a movement. These families are going to go out and help others. The model will spread. You've fundamentally changed how people think about family reunification. We have a long way to go. The system is still broken in so many places. But you've proven change is possible. That's everything. They stood in comfortable silence, watching through the windows as children played and adults laughed together. I was empty before Grace, Jonathan said quietly. Successful, but empty. I had everything except what mattered. And now I have purpose. Family. Connection. Grace calls me part of her family. So does Rebecca. So do all these people who I barely knew a few months ago. I'm richer now than I ever was before, and it has nothing to do with money. Margaret smiled. That's the real treasure, isn't it? Finding out that the best things in life can't be bought. They can only be built, one relationship at a time. As evening approached and guests began leaving, each family stopped to thank Jonathan personally. Children hugged him. Parents shook his hand or hugged him too. Each goodbye felt significant, a recognition of shared struggle and shared victory. Grace's classmates left first, then the Second Chances families trickled away in groups. Finally, it was just the core group: Jonathan, Mrs. Sullivan, Rebecca, Grace, Helen, Margaret, Thomas, and Dr. Chen, sitting around a table with leftover cake. Best birthday ever, Grace declared, cake frosting on her chin. Agreed, Helen said. Though I might be biased since I missed the last few. You're here now, Grace said. That's what matters. Rebecca looked around the table. I keep thinking about how none of us knew each other a year ago. We were all strangers living separate lives. And now we're family. Chosen family, Mrs. Sullivan added. Sometimes that's the strongest kind. I'll drink to that, Margaret said, raising her cup of punch. They all raised their cups in a toast. To family. To second chances. To the community they had built together. Later, as Jonathan drove home through the darkening city, he passed Parker Street. Almost without thinking, he pulled over and parked near the bench where he had found Grace 8 months earlier. The bench looked ordinary now. Just a piece of public furniture on a city street. But Jonathan would never see it as ordinary again. This bench had changed his life. It had been the beginning of everything that mattered. He sat down on it, the same spot where Grace had been lying when he found her. He tried to remember exactly what he had been thinking that night, walking down this street alone. He had been going through the motions of life, without really living. Successful but disconnected. Wealthy but poor in the ways that mattered. And then he had stopped. One simple choice, to stop instead of keep walking. His phone buzzed with a text from Grace. Thank you for the best birthday. I love you. Jonathan smiled. She had never said those words before. I love you. Such simple words, but they meant everything. He texted back, I love you too, Grace. Thank you for letting me be part of your family. Another text came through, this time from Rebecca. Grace is asleep with the biggest smile on her face. You made her so happy today. You make us all happy. We're lucky to have you in our lives. Jonathan sat on that bench for a long time, watching the city lights come on one by one. He thought about all the families they had helped, all the children who were home with their parents because second chances existed. He thought about the families still waiting, still fighting, still hoping. There was so much work left to do, so many broken systems to fix, so many children who needed help. It felt overwhelming sometimes, the magnitude of the need. But then he remembered what Dr. Chen had said months ago, you can't save everyone. You can only save the ones in front of you, and trust that they'll help save others. Ripples spreading outward from one moment of compassion. Jonathan stood up from the bench and walked back to his car. Tomorrow, there would be new families to help, new challenges to face, new battles to fight. But tonight, he could rest in the knowledge that Grace was home with her mother, celebrating her birthday surrounded by people who loved her. That Katie Harrison's daughter called her mama again. That Sandra Martinez's children were sleeping in their own home. That Daniel's twins were learning to trust their father again. One family at a time, they were changing the world. And it had all started here, on this bench, on a snowy Christmas Eve, with one choice, to stop instead of walk away. 9 months later, December returned to Denver, bringing the first snow of winter. The city transformed into a wonderland of white, lights twinkling from every building and storefront. Christmas Eve arrived with a kind of crisp, cold beauty that made everything feel magical. Jonathan stood at the window of his penthouse, looking out at the city below. So much had changed since last Christmas. A year ago, he had walked down Parker Street alone, going through the motions of life. Tonight, he was getting ready to attend the grand opening of something that would have been unimaginable then. The Reed Community Center. Mrs. Sullivan appeared in the doorway. Mr. Reed, the car is ready. Are you coming? Just thinking, he said. About how different everything is. A year ago, I didn't know Grace existed. I'd never heard of Rebecca Turner or Helen Morrison. Second Chances Network was just a vague idea. And now you have a family and a purpose, Mrs. Sullivan finished. Life has a funny way of giving us exactly what we need when we're ready for it. They drove through the snowy streets to Parker Street, where the old community center building had been completely renovated. Jonathan had purchased it 6 months ago, when the city could no longer afford its upkeep. Working with Second Chances Network, they had transformed it into a comprehensive family support center. The building now housed transitional apartments on the upper floors, counseling offices, a legal clinic, a job training center, childcare facilities, and community gathering spaces. But the heart of the building was the lobby, where a single bench sat beneath a spotlight. The bench from Parker Street. The bench where Grace had been lying when Jonathan found her. When renovation plans were being finalized, Grace had asked if the bench could be preserved. So people remember, she had said. So they remember that hope survives even in the coldest moments. Now that bench sat in the lobby with a plaque that read, The Promise Bench. In memory of all the families waiting for someone to stop and help. May we all choose to stop instead of walk away. Jonathan arrived early, wanting a quiet moment before the crowds. He sat on the bench, running his hand over the cold metal. This ordinary piece of furniture had been the beginning of everything that mattered in his life now. It looks good here, a voice said. Jonathan turned to find Thomas Wright. You're early too. Wouldn't miss this. You know, when I first started investigating Rebecca's case, I thought I was just trying to help one family. I had no idea it would lead to all this. None of us did. They walked through the building together. Each floor represented a different aspect of support for families in crisis. The second floor housed 6 furnished transitional apartments where families could live for up to 18 months while they rebuilt stability. The third floor had offices for therapists, social workers, and legal advocates. The fourth floor was dedicated to job training and education programs. We're already at capacity, Thomas said. 12 families living here, another 20 receiving services. And we've only been open for a week. We're going to need to expand again. Margaret Delacroix already mentioned that. She's talking about funding a second center in Colorado Springs. People began arriving for the opening ceremony. Second Chances families came first, including all the ones who had been at Grace's birthday party plus dozens more who had joined the program since. Staff members arrived. City officials who had initially been skeptical but were now supporters. Business leaders who had signed on as partners. Media covering the story. Rebecca, Grace, and Helen arrived together, all wearing red dresses. Grace ran to Jonathan immediately. "It's really happening," she said. "The center is really opening." "It really is." "And Mama's going to work here." "She is." Rebecca had accepted a position as the Family Services Coordinator for the center. Her journey from patient to advocate was complete. Dr. Chen arrived with a group of Second Chances staff, including Sandra Martinez, who was now a certified peer support specialist. Katie Harrison came with her daughter, who stayed close to her mother's side but smiled shyly at Grace. More families arrived. Daniel with his twin boys, who he now had joint custody of after completing the program. Lisa with her daughter, reunited 3 months ago. A steady stream of parents and children who represented the program's success. Margaret Delacroix arrived last, elegant in a deep blue coat. She surveyed the crowd with satisfaction. "This is what changing the world looks like," she said to Jonathan. "Not grand gestures, but steady, consistent support for people who need it." The ceremony began at 6 o'clock. Jonathan stood at a podium in the lobby, the promised bench visible behind him. Hundreds of people filled the space, spilling out into hallways and up the stairs. "A year ago today," Jonathan began, "I walked down Parker Street on my way home from work. I almost missed the bench entirely. Almost walked right past a little girl who was freezing to death because everyone else had already walked past her." He saw Grace in the front row, between Rebecca and Helen, listening intently. "But I stopped. And that one choice changed my life. Grace Turner taught me about courage, hope, and resilience. Her mother, Rebecca, taught me about the power of second chances. Together, they taught me that families are worth fighting for, even when the system says they are not." Jonathan gestured to the bench behind him. "This bench represents something important. It represents all the moments when we have a choice: keep walking or stop and help. Most people walk. It's easier. It's safer. It doesn't complicate our lives." He paused, looking around at all the faces. "But when we stop, when we choose compassion over convenience, we change lives. Not just the lives of the people we help, but our own lives too. Grace saved me just as much as I saved her." Rebecca stood to speak next. Her voice was steady now, confident in a way it hadn't been a year ago. "I was the mother everyone had given up on," she said. "I'd failed at keeping my apartment, my job, my mental health. I'd failed at protecting my daughter from the consequences of my breakdown. The system looked at me and saw someone who couldn't be trusted, who would always be a risk." She reached down and took Grace's hand, pulling her to stand beside her. But Jonathan and the people at Second Chances saw something different. They saw a mother who loved her daughter and was fighting to get better. They gave me resources instead of judgment, support instead of barriers. And here we are, stronger than we've ever been. Grace tugged on her mother's sleeve, asking for the microphone. Rebecca handed it to her, adjusting it to her height. "Hi," Grace said, her voice small but clear. "I'm Grace. I'm 8 years old. Last Christmas Eve, I was sleeping on a bench in the snow because I was waiting for my Mama to come back. I was really cold and really scared. But I didn't give up because Mama promised she would find me." Her voice grew stronger. "And then Jonathan found me instead. He took me to the hospital and gave me a home and helped find Mama. And now we're all together again, and Mama has a job here helping other families like us." Grace looked directly at the crowd. "My teacher says that one person can make a difference." Jonathan proved that's true. "But you know what? Every person here can make a difference too. You just have to stop and help instead of walking away." The simplicity of her message hit everyone powerfully. Several people in the crowd were crying. Helen spoke next. sharing her story of struggling to care for Grace while barely surviving herself, and her gratitude for being brought back into their lives. Sandra Martinez talked about reuniting with her children and finding new purpose in helping other families. Katie Harrison spoke about hearing her daughter call her mama again. One by one, families shared their stories. Each one different in details but similar in theme. They had been lost and then found. They had been written off and then given chances. They had been alone and then surrounded by support. Dr. Chen presented statistics about the program's success. In 1 year, Second Chances Network had helped 83 families reunite. Another 100 families were currently in the program. The model was being studied by other cities and states. Policy changes were being proposed based on their data. But this isn't just about numbers, Dr. Chen said. It's about recognizing that families are worth fighting for. That people can change when given real support. That our systems should be designed to keep families together, not tear them apart. Margaret Delacroix announced the Delacroix Foundation's commitment to fund 3 more community centers across Colorado over the next 5 years. The crowd erupted in applause. As the formal ceremony ended, people toured the building. Families explored the transitional apartments, imagining what it would be like to have stable housing while rebuilding their lives. Parents asked questions about services. Children ran through the common areas, playing together. Jonathan found himself standing in front of the promise bench again. People kept approaching to thank him, to shake his hand, to tell him their stories. Each interaction was meaningful, each story important. But then Grace appeared beside him again. "Can I sit on the bench with you?" Of course. They sat together, this man and the girl who had changed his life. Around them, the party continued. Families laughing, children playing, hope filling every corner of the building. "Are you happy?" Grace asked. "Very happy. Are you?" "Yes. But Jonathan, I want to tell you something." "What's that?" "Remember my birthday wish? I wish that everyone would be happy like they were that day." "I remember." "I think it came true. Not just for one day, but for always. Because now we have this place where people can get help. Where families can be together again. My wish came true because you made it happen." "We all made it happen together, Grace." "Yeah, but you started it. You were the first one to stop." She leaned against his shoulder, and they sat in comfortable silence. The noise of the party faded into background music. For a moment, it was just the two of them on this bench that had once held so much disbelief and now symbolized so much hope. Rebecca approached with Mrs. Sullivan, Helen, and Margaret. "There you are. We're taking a group photo in front of the bench. Everyone who was part of Grace's journey." They gathered around the promise bench. Jonathan and Grace in the center, Rebecca and Helen on either side. Mrs. Sullivan, Thomas Wright, Dr. Chen, Margaret, Barbara the social worker, Dr. Martinez, Sandra, Katie, and dozens of others who had been part of the story crowded in. Someone counted to 3, and they all smiled for the camera. In that moment, frozen in time, they were more than individuals. They were a family built by choice, by compassion, by the simple decision to stop and help instead of walking away. After the photo, Grace pulled Jonathan aside one more time. "Can I show you something?" She led him to the second floor, to one of the transitional apartments. A young mother was moving in with her 2 children, a girl about Grace's age and a younger boy. The woman looked overwhelmed but hopeful. "Hi," Grace said to the girl. "I'm Grace. I used to live in a place like this when I was waiting for my mama to come back. It's going to be okay. I promise." The girl looked at Grace with wide eyes. "Really? Really? My mama works here now. She helps families like yours. And Jonathan, he's the one who built this place. They are both really nice." Jonathan watched Grace comfort this frightened child, offering hope from her own experience. This was the ripple effect Margaret had talked about. Grace, who had been saved, was now helping save others. The young mother approached Jonathan with tears in her eyes. "Thank you for this place. I've been living in my car with my kids for 2 months. I thought I'd lost everything. This apartment, the services, the support, it's a miracle." "You're going to be okay," Jonathan said. "We're here to help for as long as you need." Why? The woman asked. Why do you care about people like me? Jonathan looked at Grace, who smiled at him. Because a very wise little girl taught me that everyone deserves second chances, he said. And because when we help each other, we all become stronger. As the evening wound down and guests began leaving, Jonathan stood at the window of his old office on the top floor, which was now the center's administrative office. He could see Parker Street below, the bench where everything had started now preserved inside this building dedicated to hope. Mrs. Sullivan found him there. Quite a year, Mr. Reed. Quite a year. You know, I wasn't sure about any of this when it started. I thought maybe you were having some kind of crisis, making impulsive decisions. But you weren't. You were finally making the right decisions. I was lost before Grace. I just didn't realize it. And now I'm found. They stood together in silence, watching the snow fall outside. Somewhere in the building below, families were settling into their new apartments. Somewhere, children were sleeping safely for the first time in months. Somewhere, parents were daring to hope again. Jonathan's phone buzzed with a text from Rebecca. Grace wanted me to tell you she loves you and she's glad you stopped walking that night. He typed back, me too. Tell her I love her too. Another text came through, from a number he didn't recognize. Mr. Reed, this is Jennifer from the press conference. My name is Jennifer Chen and I'm a producer for 60 Minutes. We'd like to do a story on Second Chances Network and the Reed Community Center. Would you be interested? Jonathan smiled. More publicity meant more awareness, more funding, more families helped. A year ago, he would have avoided the spotlight. Now he understood that visibility served a purpose. He texted back, yes. Let's talk. The final guests left around 10 o'clock. Jonathan, Rebecca, Grace, Helen, Mrs. Sullivan, Margaret, Thomas, and Dr. Chen were the last ones in the building. They gathered in the lobby one final time, standing around the promise bench. To new beginnings, Margaret said, raising an imaginary glass. To second chances, Dr. Chen added. To families, Rebecca said, pulling Grace close. To hope, Thomas contributed. To compassion, Mrs. Sullivan said. To stopping instead of walking away, Jonathan finished. Grace looked around at all of them. To promises kept, she said softly. They stood in a circle, this unlikely family bound together by one cold night and one choice. Outside, snow continued to fall on Parker Street. But inside the Reed Community Center, warmth and hope and possibility filled every corner. Grace went to the promise bench and placed something on it. Jonathan saw it was the old photograph of her and Rebecca in their red dresses, the one she had clutched that night on the bench. She had framed it. So people remember where we started, Grace said. And so they know how far hope can take you. As they prepared to leave, Jonathan took one last look around. This building, these programs, this community of support, it had all started with one moment of choosing compassion. One decision not to walk away from a child in need. He thought about all the benches in all the cities, all the people waiting for someone to stop and help. There was so much work still to do. So many families still in crisis. So many children still invisible to the world around them. But tonight, they could celebrate what they had built. Tonight, they could honor the families who had fought their way back together. Tonight, they could rest in the knowledge that they were changing the system, one family at a time. Jonathan locked the doors and set the alarm. Tomorrow, the center would open for its first full day of operations. Tomorrow, more families would walk through those doors looking for help. Tomorrow, the work would continue. But tonight, Christmas Eve, exactly 1 year after he found Grace on a bench in the snow, Jonathan walked to his car surrounded by the people who had become his family. Grace held his hand on one side, Mrs. Sullivan on the other. Rebecca and Helen walked ahead, arms linked. Margaret and Thomas followed behind, discussing plans for the Colorado Springs Center. They were no longer strangers. They were a family built by choice, by struggle, by the decision to stop and help when everyone else walked away. As they reached their cars, Grace turned to Jonathan one last time. Thank you for the best year of my life, she said. Thank you for the best year of mine, he replied. And then they went their separate ways into the snowy night, each heading home. But they weren't really separate at all. They were connected now, permanently, by the invisible threads of love and compassion and shared purpose. The promised bench sat in the lobby of the Reed Community Center, bathed in soft light, waiting for tomorrow when new families would see it and understand its message. Hope survives even in the coldest moments. Families are worth fighting for. One person really can make a difference. And sometimes, the greatest blessing is simply choosing to stop instead of walk away. Grace Turner slept that night in her own bed, in the apartment she shared with her mother, the photograph of them in red dresses on her nightstand. She dreamed of benches and snow and the moment when a stranger became family. Rebecca Turner lay awake for a while, marveling at how far they had come. From broken to whole. From separated to reunited. From hopeless to hopeful. She whispered a prayer of gratitude for Jonathan Reed, for second chances, for the community that had caught her when she fell. Helen Morrison drove back to Breckenridge with plans forming in her mind. She would start a satellite program there, bringing the Second Chances model to mountain communities. Her family had been lost and found. Now she would help other families do the same. Margaret Delacroix planned her next moves, identifying other cities that needed community centers like the one they had built. The Delacroix Foundation would fund them. The movement would spread. Dr. Chen reviewed data and prepared reports. 83 families reunited in 1 year. Hundreds more in the pipeline. The model was working. The research was solid. Change was possible. Mrs. Sullivan baked cookies for tomorrow's Christmas dinner, which would include all of them, Jonathan, Rebecca, Grace, Helen, and anyone else who needed a place to belong. Her kitchen smelled of cinnamon and home. And Jonathan Reed sat in his penthouse, no longer empty despite being alone. He was surrounded by purpose, by connection, by love. He opened the scrapbook the families had made for him and read through the notes again. One from Grace caught his eye. "You saved my life. But more than that, you showed me that good people exist. That promises can be kept. That families can be fixed. Thank you for not walking away. Love, Grace." Jonathan closed the scrapbook and looked out at the Denver skyline. Somewhere out there, another child might be waiting. Another family might be falling apart. Another person might need someone to stop and help. But now there was a system in place to catch them. A community ready to help. A model that worked. One bench. One choice. One family at a time. That was how you changed the world.